37-year-old Satoru Akame is a typical corporate worker who is perfectly content with his monotonous lifestyle in Tokyo, other than failing to nail down a girlfriend even once throughout his life. In the midst of a casual encounter with his colleague, he falls victim to a random assailant on the streets and is stabbed. However, while succumbing to his injuries, a peculiar voice echoes in his mind and recites a bunch of commands which the dying man cannot make sense of. When Satoru regains consciousness, he discovers that he has reincarnated as a goop of slime in an unfamiliar realm. In doing so, he acquires newfound skills, notably the power to devour anything and mimic its appearance and abilities. He then stumbles upon the sealed catastrophe-level monster, Storm Dragon Veldora, who had been sealed away for the past 300 years for devastating a town to ashes. Sympathetic to his predicament, Satoru befriends him, promising to assist in destroying the seal. In return, Veldora bestows upon him the name Rimuru Tempest to grant him divine protection. Now, liberated from the mundanities of his past life, Rimuru embarks on a fresh journey with a distinct goal in mind. As he grows accustomed to his new physique, his gooey antics ripple throughout the world, gradually altering his fate. The scene begins with airplanes shooting down firearms on a particular human settlement. A little girl looks at the fire everywhere, and the havoc it is causing while some other people run away from the area screaming. More firearms are released down on the people, as the fire continues to ravage the buildings. A woman holds the little girl's hand as they run towards the place they'll find safety. One of the burning buildings breaks down and falls on the girl's mother. The devastated little girl calls her mother and asks about the shelter they are heading to. A hand gets raised in the shadows, and the little girl gets surrounded by a fire tornado. The fire engulfs her and erases her, while the whole community continues to get ravaged by fire. Present-day Tokyo. A middle-aged man who's walking around in the busy city looks around and comments about how peaceful it is with a smile on his face. He continues to walk as he thinks about his normal and uneventful life. He narrates how he graduated to how he started making decent money. He talks more about himself as a perfectly content 37-year-old man. He begins to think about the only thing missing in his life, which is a girlfriend, and how he hasn't had one in his 37 years. He continues to think about the girlfriend topic until he gets called by a junior. He walks up to his junior, who's with a young lady, and apologizes for coming late. He asks his junior what he wants to talk about, and the girl at the scene immediately introduces herself as Sawatari Miho and talks about how she used to see him and all. The man introduces himself to her as Mikami Satoru and talks about how famous she is. Satoru teases her for a while until Satoru's junior, who's standing with her, tells her about it. The junior tells Satoru not to be hard on her, while the girl pouts. Satoru apologizes with a smile and begins to think about what his junior wants. The junior suggests that they go to a great place that he booked for them. They turn to walk to the booked place while Satoru continues to think about how he would congratulate them, because his junior booked his favorite place. The people start to panic and murmur as they notice a man running through the crowd. The man runs towards them with a knife in his hands. The junior uses his body to shield Miho, but gets pushed out of the way by Satoru, who wants to protect his junior, Tamura, and Miho. Satoru gets stabbed by the man who runs away from the scene. Satoru falls to his knees in pain as starts to lose blood. Tamura hurriedly goes to check on his senior while Satoru continues to think about what is going on and how he doesn't want it. A type of system voice talks about some ability confirmations as Satoru continues to lose blood. Tamura calls for an ambulance while the other people around begin to panic because of the incident. Satoru, who's still losing blood, lies down on the ground, thinking about how he doesn't want to die. He raises his hand and Tamura immediately holds it while asking for what he wants. Satoru tells Tamura to take out the hard drive in his computer and completely wipe it. The system voice continues to say some new resistance abilities he's gaining as he continues to feel pain. Tamura begins to cry and says that he just wants to show off Sawatari to him, which makes Satoru smile. He tells Tamura to take care of her and his computer. Satoru starts to think about how he never thought he would die as a virgin. He thinks to himself that he will be more aggressive and screw every girl he sees as he is dying. The system voice says that he has acquired a unique skill called Predator. Satoru thinks of how a 30-year-old virgin is a sage and calls himself a great sage because he's close to 40 years old. The system voice says that he has acquired an extra called Sage, and it will transform into the unique skill Great Sage. Satoru tells the voice to shut up so he can have some quiet time, and he immediately passes away. Tamura, who's holding Satoru's hand, begins to call for his senior and shouts out his name. In a dark void, Satoru says that he can't see anything. He begins to ask questions concerning the situation while remembering how someone was teasing him about being a sage or a great sage. He immediately remembers how he was stabbed and everything that happened. He He tries to calm himself down and go over what is going on, but soon realizes that he cannot feel anything. After a while, he starts to move as his monochromatic vision starts to brighten up. He senses rocks in the location where he is, and realizes that he's not in the hospital. His body moves again, and feels a plant. He tried to eat it and speak, but none of the body functions worked for him. He realizes that the plant is dissolving, and it's permeating throughout his body. He begins to wonder what he is, because humans don't dissolve plants. He thinks about his computer and juniors as his thoughts voice changes. He moves around a little and discovers that he bounces and seems to have some elasticity. He checks himself from the exterior and complains about how he went from being a self-proclaimed hot manly man into a slime. He says that he got stabbed, died, and got reincarnated as a slime. Slime begins to narrate that his new form has been surprisingly handy. He continues to talk about how he doesn't have to sleep, and some of the things he can do that humans can't. He wonders where the food he eats goes since he hasn't pooped, and he immediately gets a reply from the system voice. The system voice tells him about the predator skill that makes it possible for him to store things in his stomach. He looks around while saying that he heard the voice when he was stabbed too and asks who it is. The system voice introduces itself to Slime as the effect of his unique skill named Great Sage. Slime begins to question Great Sage about the predator skill it was telling him about. Great Sage explains the ability to him and Slime tries it out on some plants. Great Sage analyzes the plant he ingested and tells him the result. Slime asks it about the word magicule it mentioned when it was explaining to him. Great Sage tells him what it is, but he demands an explanation he can understand. After all the explanations, Slime begins to say the things he can do within his body, which the Great Sage affirms. Slime begins to eat up the hippocute herbs in the cave to make healing potions that will be stored in his stomach. After eating herbs for a while, Slime jumps on a shiny rock and asks for what it's worth. Great Sage calls it Magistone ore and explains what it is and its value to Slime. Slime begins to gobble up all the Magistone ore he comes across in the cave. He continues to eat up herbs and Magistone ores until he falls into a water body. He begins to sink as he wonders what happened and where he is. He finds out that he is in a lake and asks if slimes don't float. He reaches the bottom of the lake and discovers that he doesn't feel like he's suffocating. He thinks of what to do and gets an idea. He swallows up some water and releases it as a propelling force. Great Sage declares the skill he acquired as the water pressure propulsion while continuing to move very fast on the surface of the water. Slime starts to get worried because of the speed he's moving, but soon gets out of the water. The force propels him towards an area where he runs into an invincible wall. Slime talks about what happened and how he doesn't feel any pain. Great Sage immediately tells him about the pain nullification ability he acquired, which makes him say that his body is convenient. He decides to be more careful with his body, only to hear a voice from the dark area he is in. The voice continues to call to him as he notices a large shadow-looking being talking with him. The creature continues to call Slime and tells him not to ignore him. Slime, who's been trying to answer but can't hear his voice, complains in his thoughts and calls the creature a baldy. The creature tells Slime that he has guts for calling him a baldy. The creature screams as his silhouette shows a dragon shape, and its scream makes the cave shake. The dragon threatens Slime, asking if he has a death wish. Slime begins to apologize and says the reason why it happened. The dragon laughs and starts to relate with Slime in a more friendly way. The dragon sees that Slime doesn't have sight. He offers to grant Slime sight on certain conditions. Slime asks for the conditions, and the dragon tells them to him. Slime asks if that's all he has to do, and the dragon responds positively, telling him about how he has been sealed there for 300 years. Slime accepts his conditions, and the dragon tells him about the skill called Magic Sensi. He explains the skill to Slime, and he immediately tries it out. Slime sees the surroundings and magicules that the dragon is talking about. Great Sage pops up to proclaim that he has gained an extra skill called Magic Sense. Slime wonders what the extra means, and Great Sage explains how the skill grading works to him. He accepts the Magic Sense skill activation, and he immediately starts to see everything around him. Slime hurriedly moves to check himself on the surface of the water and sees that he is a slime. The slime moves back to where the creature he was talking with is and discovers that it's a dragon. He gets very shocked when the dragon makes a finger gesture for him to get closer. The dragon introduces itself as the storm dragon, Veldora. Veldora says that he is one of the 4 true dragons that exist in their world. Veldora starts to laugh again, which shakes the cave. Veldora asks Slime if he remembers their promise, and Slime immediately replies that he's not scared while trying to leave the scene. Veldora shouts at him to stop and says that he's unusual because slimes are normally low-ranked monsters that don't think. He asks Slime if he's unique. Slime asks for the meaning of unique, and Veldora explains it to him. Slime tells Veldora about how he used to be a human and how he ended up being the way he is. They start to discuss his reincarnation and Slime's unusual entry into their world. Veldora tells him about how people end up in their world and tells Slime that he's the first of the reincarnated there. Slime asks if there are other ways people come to their world, and Veldora tells him about the other worlders. Slime thinks about what Veldora said and says that he would like to try and find some of the other worlders. Veldora pouts and asks him if he's leaving already, which makes Slime say that he'll wait for a while. Slime's words make Veldora happy, and Slime asks about the seal he was talking about. Veldora tells Slime his story from 300 years ago. Veldora says that he turned a town into ashes by mistake, and someone came to stop him. He talks about how he lost to the person, which makes Slime ask who the person is because he looks strong. Veldora tells him about the hero who's blessed with divine protection and that she calls herself a summon. Veldora explains what a summon is to Slime, which makes Slime more excited because it's looking more like a game world setting. Veldora tells him the way summons are being used as weapons, which Slime says is cruel. Veldora says that their world is based on the survival of the fittest, which Slime says he understands and asks if he has been there ever since the hero sealed him. Veldora affirms it and says that he has been bored since then. Slime begins to tell the story of how he never had a girlfriend in 37 years, and he says that it can't compare to 300 lonely years. Slime suggests that they both become friends, which Veldora accepts after his tsundere acts. Slime makes a handshake contact with Veldora's claw to seal their friendship. Slime begins to narrate the story of how he ended up in his present situation. He wonders if Tamura did what he told him to, without looking into the computer first. In a bathroom, Tamura carries Satoru's computer and throws it into the bath filled with water. He pays his respects to his senior and says that he'll name his son Satoru if he ever has one. Slime asks the dragon, Veldora, what they're going to do about the unlimited prison seal the hero put on him. He tells the dragon that he doesn't like the idea that his friend has been sealed for 100 years. Veldora makes a cute puppy face that Slime tells him not to make because he's not a cute girl. Veldora sits up and says that he'll appreciate it if Slime finds a way out for him. He continues to tell Slime how he wouldn't have lasted another 100 years before his magic runs out and how he's losing magicules. Slime looks around the magicule-rich cave and says that it is probably why it has magicule-rich herbs and ores. Slime asks Veldora what will happen if his magic runs out, and he replies that he'll die. Slime thinks about it and decides to try something out. Slime moves to the gate of the seal and asks the Great Sage to consume the unlimited prison seal with his predator ability. He makes contact with the seal, but it fails. Slime asks the Great Sage what they can do, and it begins to examine the other possibilities, while the dragon. After the possibility examination, the Great Sage relays its findings to Slime. Slime talks to the dragon about what he got for a while and says that he has a suggestion. He asks Veldora if it wants to get in his stomach and explains how it'll work with his predator ability. Veldora laughs aloud, which surprises Slime. He tells Slime that it sounds interesting and begs him to do it. Slime asks if he's fine with it, which Veldora gives its reason for. Slime understands it to be better 2 than 1 and says that it's great that way. Slime says that he's going to use his predator ability, but Veldora tells him to wait. He says that he wants them to name each other while talking about the importance of a name and family. They both think of cool names for each other. Slime gets the family name Tempest, which Veldora screams out and says that it sounds fantastic. He declares that he's Veldora Tempest from that day on, which makes Slime ask if he likes it. Veldora grants Slime the name Rimuru, which Slime says is not bad. Rimuru's little slime body begins to glow as he realizes that something has changed deep in his soul, and the name Rimuru Tempest has been engraved on it. They look at each other and call their names. Rimuru tells Veldora that he's going to eat him and tells him to break out of the unlimited prison seal. Veldora laughs and tells Rimuru to leave it to him and says that they'll be seeing each other face to face in no time. Rimuru activates his unique skill, Predator. His little slime body spreads out like water and covers up Veldora's large body. Rimuru begins to congest Veldora and gets smaller until he completely swallows Veldora. Rimuru returns to his little smile form and thinks about how fast the process was. The Great Sage asks Rimuru if he would like to analyze the unique skill of unlimited imprisonment. Rimuru replies that it should do it. He begins to narrate how a great tremor rocked the world on that day because of the disappearance of the storm dragon Veldora. He talks about the location of the cave where Veldora was sealed on the map and the countries close to the place, particularly the Kingdom of Bloomund. In the Kingdom of Bloomund, a minister, Baron Veryard, asks the guildmaster, Fuse if he heard about the storm dragon, Veldora. Fuse replies that he has, which makes Baron Veriard commend him as the guild master. Baron Veriard asks him what the guild intends to do about it. Fuse replies that they don't have plans to take any action. Baron Veriard begins to talk about the possibility of monsters galvanizing, while Fuse also talks about the possibility of the Eastern Kingdom using the route. Baron Veriard says that the provinces surrounding the Great Forest of Jura will fall in the blink of an eye under the Empire's rule if their enemies get through the forest. Fuse asks him if he's getting enough sleep and says that he'll conduct an investigation personally as a favor to an old friend. Fuse talks about how the investigation will go, and Baron Veriard thanks him. Rimuru thinks about how long it has been since he swallowed Veldora as he hops around the cave looking for an exit. He also swallows up the ores he finds along the way and acquires skills that he tries out. Rimuru climbs up to a high area in the cave, hoping that the red thread of fate is leading him onto something. He reaches the top to discover a black serpent which scares him at first sight. Rimuru thinks about how it isn't that scary compared to Veldora and decides to take it on. Rimuru defeats it with the water blade skill he just obtained. He thinks about the strength of the attack and says that he has to be careful about who he uses it on. He turns to leave but thinks about swallowing the black serpent's dead body to gain its ability. Rimuru immediately swallows it and gains some abilities that the Great Sage says. He decides to get more skills. He goes to take on an Armorsaurus, Evil Centipede, a Black Spider, and Giant Bat progressively. He defeats them all and swallows them to gain some abilities. Rimuru begins to practice speaking using the organ that the giant bat used for its ultrasonic wave. Rimuru continues to wander around the cave for several weeks until he finally reaches a giant door, which he says is probably the exit. He thinks of how to get past the door by destroying it with his water blade. The door begins to open, which makes Rimuru excited as the outside light enters the room. 3 people stand at the entrance of the opened door, while Rimuru hurriedly hides somewhere. 2 men discuss how the keyhole of the door gave them trouble. The girl with them walks in and asks if they won't be attacked out of nowhere. She talks about the escape spell as she uses her magic staff to produce light. Rimuru looks at them and thinks to himself that they're the first humans he has seen, and he wonders if they are adventurers. He is suddenly surprised about how he understands what they're saying. Great Sage responds and explains how it works to him. Great Sage also tells him how to relay his thoughts as speech, which makes Rimuru think about how the humans will probably react if a slime talks to them. One of the men tells the others that he's going to activate his stealth art. He activates the skill and the 3 of them disappear immediately. The scene surprises Rimuru, who thinks about how useful the skill will be, and says that he has to make friends with the guy who activated the skill. After a while, he looks around hoping that they have gone in, and he hops out of the cave. The girl who's with the guys stops and tells the guys that she thought she sensed a monster, which she later claims might be her imagination. Rimuru enters the forest, thinking about the sunlight, and outside that he hasn't seen in a while. He begins to think about Veldora, and the promise he made to him. He decides to build up stories that he can tell to Veldora when they meet again, as he continues to hop through the forest. Rimuru gets confronted by some lightly armed goblins. Some of the goblins fret and shiver, while Rimuru thinks of them as the first story he's going to tell Veldora. Rimuru accesses the bodies and weapons of the goblins while thinking of what to do. One of the goblins in front calls Rimuru a strong one and asks about the business that brought him there. Rimuru thinks to himself if they're talking to him, which they nod in affirmation. Rimuru, who finally understands how his communication mechanism works, tries to greet them, but releases a loud shout, which brings the goblins to their knees. They all bow and beg Rimuru to bring down his voice. Rimuru asked them what they wanted silently this time, and the goblin in front replied that they sensed a power monster and came there for precaution. After discussing for a while, the goblin tells Rimuru that he wishes to ask for a favor. At the goblin village, Rimuru narrates how he was led to their shoddy village and thinks about how Veldora can destroy the village with a snort. In one of the huts, the village elder welcomes his visitor and introduces himself to Rimuru. Rimuru greets him back and asks for the favor they want to ask him. They begin to tell him about how their god disappeared and how they've been harassed by other monsters because they lack numbers. Rimuru thinks of Veldora being the god they're talking about because of the timing and thinks about how they want him to help out. He replies to the elder and the goblin who led the others earlier that he's a slime. He tells them that he can't do what they expect him to. The elder and the goblin tell Rimuru not to be modest, but he wonders why they're saying it. The elder tells him that a mere slime wouldn't emit his type of aura. Rimuru thinks about the aura they're talking about and asks the Great Sage to let him see himself from their perspective. The great sage shows it to him, and he immediately understands why the goblins were scared of him. Rimuru commends the elder for noticing and tells them that they have good potential as he sucks in the aura. The elder responds positively to Rimuru's comment and asks if he is testing them. Rimuru affirms and continues to talk about their potential while thinking about the humans at the cave who did not notice it. The elder thanks Rimuru for his compliment and goes straight to the favor they want to ask for. Rimuru narrates the story about how the dire wolves have been attacking the goblins and how the goblins have lost a lot of their own. The elder tells Rimuru that there are 100 dire wolves and that they have 60 people, including females who can fight. Rimuru touches on the topic of a goblin warrior, the elder's son who died just to get information about the dire wolves. Rimuru apologizes about the topic and begins to think about what to do. He asks the leader what he'll get in return for helping them. He thinks about the purpose of the question to himself. The elder bows and tells Rimuru that he'll have their loyalty as he begs Rimuru to grant them his protection. The elder's son, who's also in the room, bows and begs. Rimuru says it's nostalgic as he remembers how his junior used to ask him for favors at the office. The goblins begin to hear a direwolf howl, and they begin to panic. The chief comes out of the room where he's discussing with Rimuru. He tries to calm the people who are panicking. They hear the words of Rimuru, who tells them not to fear, and claims that they'll defeat the direwolves. Rimuru tells them that he'll grant their wish instead of the storm dragon Veldora. The goblins all bow. The goblin elder, who's in tears, thanks Rimuru and tells him that they are his loyal servants. Rimuru responds that they can count on him. Rimuru narrates it as the story of how he became the goblins' leader and guardian. The goblins surround Rimuru, waiting for his orders. Rimuru looks at all of them and thinks about how scrawny they look. He thinks of the pressure he's feeling and asks them if they understand the situation. The elder's son salutes Rimuru and says that they are prepared for a life or death battle. Rimuru tells them to relax and think only about doing the best they can. Rimuru blushes because of how cool he sounds while the goblins look at him astonished. Rimuru tells them to take him to the place where the wounded are. Rimuru looks at the injured goblins lying in the hut. The elder tells him that they've done all they can do, but the claws of the dire wolves enter deep into their bodies. Rimuru engulfs one of the injured goblins whole, and the elder asks what he's doing. Rimuru spits out one of the goblins healed, which shocks the elder. The healed goblin stands while the others look at him surprised. Rimuru thinks about what he tried out and how it was effective. He does the same for the other injured ones and spits them out in front of the elder. The elder and the other goblins bow to Rimuru while he spits out the last person. He tells them that they'll build a fence to fortify the village. The great forest of Jura. At nighttime, the dire wolves raise their heads. Their leader tells them that Veldora's protection has vanished from the forest and that they have nothing to fear. He declares that they'll destroy the goblin village that night and create a foothold there in the great forest of Jura. The other dire wolves howl as their leaders declare that they will rule the forest. He says some more things to motivate them and they begin to run towards the goblin village. They reach the goblin village only to discover their fence. The dire wolf's leader asks what good is their flimsy fence. His son comes to his side and notifies him about the slime outside the fence. Rimuru tells them to leave the place at once, but the dire wolf's leader responds that a mere slime won't order them around. He orders his minions to trample down the fence and spill the blood of the lowly goblins. The dire wolves run towards the fence to bring it down, but they start to fall to their deaths. The leader discovers that the goblins are shooting arrows at them. He also sees threads with dire wolf blood on them. He asks Rimuru if it's his doing, which Rimuru affirms. The angry dire wolf leader declares that he'll crush Rimuru. He runs towards Rimuru and tears the threads he comes across on the way. He jumps to attack Rimuru at close range, but he gets caught by some threads which Rimuru calls the sticky thread skill. He tries to break free from the thread holding him, but he gets decapitated by Rimuru, who releases a water blade at him. The direwolves grit their teeth at Rimuru as they see their leader get killed. Rimuru declares to the dire wolves that their boss is dead, and he gives them options to either submit or die. The dire wolves continue to grit their teeth, which makes Rimuru wishfully think that they just turn tail and run. Rimuru gets an idea and immediately uses Predator to consume the dead body of the direwolf's boss. Greet Sag lists out the skills he acquired from it. Rimuru uses his mimic skill to transform into a direwolf, which surprises the other direwolves. Rimuru tells them that he'll let them go and threatens them. He uses a skill named Menace, which produces a very loud howl that pushes and affects the direwolves, while hoping that they'll leave. The direwolves continue to move towards Rimuru, even with the pressure from the skill. They all bow to Rimuru and proclaim that their pack will yield to him. Rimuru thinks about the fact that the direwolves could have run away, but they didn't. The elder who's behind the barricade fence asks if they have won, which Rimuru affirms. He tells them that nothing beats peace, and the goblins begin to celebrate their victory. Rimuru thinks about how the battle ended easily and the problem at hand. The next morning, Rimuru looks at the goblins and direwolves gathered together and thinks about who's going to look after them. Rimuru notices that they are almost equal numbers. He tells them to pair up and live together. The goblins and direwolves pair up, and he tells them to work together and forget about their past differences. Rimuru thinks of what they'll do next. He starts to tell them about the important things they have to take care of. He tries to assign them to different areas but realizes that he doesn't know their names. Rimuru asks the elder for their names, and he replies that normal monsters like them don't normally have names. He continues to tell Rimuru that they don't have problems communicating without names. Rimuru tells them that having a name is more convenient, and he decides to name them. The goblin and direwolves get surprised and excited when they hear that they will be named. The elder asks again to try and confirm what Rimuru said, and he reaffirms that he'll name them. The elder and the others continue to jubilate, while Rimuru thinks about why they're so happy because of their names. Rimuru begins to name them, starting with the goblin elder, whom he names Rigurd concerning his first son who died, and he gives the second son the name of the first, Rigur. The two of them thank Rimuru as they fall to their knees and bow to him. Rimuru continues to name them, but soon starts to feel bad because he's just giving them whatever name that comes to his mind, but they are celebrating it wholeheartedly. The elder comes up to Rimuru to ask if he's okay, even though he knows how much magic power Rimuru has. Rimuru tells him that he's fine, and he continues to name them. Rimuru finishes with Goblin and looks at the dire wolves he wants to name. He wonders if they still hold grudges against him for killing their boss, but sees that they are happily wagging their tails. The son of their boss comes forward to get named. Rimuru thinks about the name he'll give to him, and he finally comes up with Ranga. Rimuru gives him the name Ranga, and he realizes that he was happily wagging his tail. Rimuru begins to melt, and he begins to ask what is going on. Great Sage tells him that he's going to sleep mode for 3 days because he has used up the magicules in his body. Rimuru narrates what the sleep mode feels like while the goblins clean his body like a treasure and watch over him every moment. After 3 days, Rimuru wakes up and declares that he's fully recovered. The female goblin in the tent comes to check on him as she rubs him. She goes out to inform their elder, while Rimuru wonders where the cute girl is from. Rigurd enters the tent to greet Rimuru, and Rimuru soon discovers that the goblins he named have changed forms. Rigurd explains how monster ranks increase when they get named. Rimuru immediately understands why they were happy when he said he was going to name them, and how his magicules got dried up. Ranga breaks into the tent to greet his master, Rimuru. He uses the star feature on his forehead to know that it's Ranga. Ranga happily wags his tail, which causes a tornado and blows the tent and Rimuru away. The goblins and direwolves celebrate Rimuru, their master, as they throw him up in the air and call out his name. Rimuru looks at them to see how much they have changed. Great Sage informs him that the male goblins have upgraded to hobgoblins and the females to gobliness. Rimuru looks at the forest scenery and asks Ranga why the other direwolves upgraded when he only named him. Ranga replies that they are all connected and that they have upgraded from direwolves to tempest wolves. Rimuru says that he understands, and Ranga begins to wag his tail again, which creates wind pressure that blows Rimuru down the hill. Rimuru complains about it while tumbling down the hill, while Ranga runs down with him, apologizing for his mistake. Rimuru, who's still tumbling, begins to think of how the goblins and direwolves will sustain themselves. The goblins and direwolves gather together in the village, and they talk to each other while Rimuru watches them. He makes a joke that they don't understand, and he immediately moves on to a new topic when they ask about it. Rimuru tells them that he's going to give them rules. He lists out the 3 rules to them, and answers the questions that they ask concerning the rules, which makes them all understand his intentions behind the rules. Rimuru declares Rigurd the Lord of the Goblins, and tells him to lead his village well. Rigurd, who's in tears, bows and proclaims that he will not disappoint Rimuru. Rimuru narrates how he assigned the goblins and direwolves into teams to find security and food acquisition. He talks about the last issues, which are the housing and clothing teams. They begin to talk about how to solve this issue, and Rigurd brings up the idea to get the dwarves to help them build the houses and trade with them. Rimuru gets excited when he hears about the dwarves, and he tells them that he'll try going to Dwargen. He tells Rigurd to look after the village while he's gone, and he immediately sets out with 4 other goblins as they ride on their dire wolves. Rimuru and his friends follow the Ameld River north in search of artisans who can make clothes and houses for them. The narrator says that they are heading to Dwargen. He also talks about the goblins accompanying Rimuru, which includes Rigur, 2 other goblins, and Gobta, who says that he'll be their guide because he has been to Dwargon before. The narrator talks about how the Tempest Wolves upgraded from Dire Wolves and how they run like the wind. Rimuru tells Ranga not to push himself too much. which he responds positively to. Ranga immediately starts to go faster, which makes Rimuru ask why he's going faster. Gobta lies on the floor, gasping as they reach a resting point. Rimuru asks Rigor who named his brother, and Rigor immediately replies that he was told that it was a passing Majin called Lord Gelmund. Rigor says that Lord Gelmund is an officer in the Demon Lord's army. Rimuru thinks of the fact that there's also a Demon Lord while he remembers that Veldora told him about a hero. He hopes that he doesn't meet such troublesome people while he looks at Ranga who's drinking from the river. They continue their journey as Rimuru recalls when he asked Ranga if he was not interested in revenge. Ranga replies that he thinks about it, but he only has gratitude towards his master for sparing their lives when they lost, and that he even gave them a new name. Ranga says that their loyalty belongs to Rimuru alone. At nighttime, Rimuru and his companions prepare some meat at a rest area. Rimuru asks Gobta what the city they're heading to is like. Gobta explains what the armed nation of Dwargon is like to Rimuru. He talks about the other races living there, and the elves catch the attention of Rimuru, who gets excited all the more. Rimuru continues to think about elves while Gobta continues his explanation. After his delusional thoughts, Rimuru asks if monsters like him are allowed in. Rigor tells him that the city is into neutral trading, as he continues to explain what the place is like. Gobta tries to talk about his previous experience at the place, but he gets interrupted by Rigor, who says that there won't be any trouble, which makes Rimuru notice the red flag. The next day, they continue their journey and reach the Kanat Mountains. Rimuru thinks about how long it takes a goblin to walk there on foot, and how they reach there in 3 days with the help of the Tempest Wolves. They see the armed nation of Dwargon from a distance away, and Rimuru gets excited hoping to see elves. Rimuru leaves the others and decides to enter the city with Gobta alone. They ask him if it's okay to just take Gobta alone, and he replies to them with his reasons. He leaves, and they all bow to him, praying for his safety. Gobta and Rimuru join the queue of people who want to enter the gate of Dwargon. Rimuru comments about the long line and the strict check at the gate. Gobta tells him that they can move around as they please when they enter. Rimuru continues his perverted thoughts of beautiful elves, but gets interrupted by 2 men who intend to kill them before entering the city because they are monsters. Gobta, who's shivering, tells Rimuru about how he got beaten there when he came before. Rimuru says that it's the fate of weak monsters, while the men discuss how much they can get from the rare talking slime. Rimuru reminds Gobta about the first rule he gave them, which is that they shouldn't attack humans. He tells Gobta to cover his ears and close his eyes until he tells him otherwise. Gobta does as he's told while Rimuru confronts the 2 men. He tells them to leave, and he will spare them. They talk down on him for a while because of the way he looks. Rimuru threatens to show his true form, and he transforms into a Tempest Star Wolf, which is like a larger form of Ranga. He realizes how big he is, and wonders if the mimic skill has improved. Rimuru hopes that the men run away, but they raise their weapons and inform the 3 other members to attack Rimuru with them. They all release their attack at Rimuru, but it all bounces off his skin. Rimuru thinks of how he thought he was a goner and tells them that it's his turn to attack them. He activates his menace skill, which releases a loud howl, followed by the shockwave of the shout. The attack blows away the defensive wall of the team attacking him. After the skill finishes, Great Sage gives him a damage report of the people affected by his attack. The guards run towards them to check what is going on, but reach there to see Rimuru in his slime form. The guards arrest them and put them in jail. Rimuru wonders why Gobta is sleeping. The captain of security, Kaido, reads the report in his hand, and concludes that the team saw them as easy targets. Rimuru replies that he just wanted to scare them away, and he apologizes. Kaido affirms his words, but gets interrupted by another guard who comes to inform him about the Armorsaurus in the mine. The guard informs Kaido about their situation, and he instructs the guard to start looking for potions. Rimuru calls for Kaido's attention, which surprises Kaido because he didn't expect Rimuru to be out. Rimuru shows him a container filled with his potions, and claims that it's the best healing potion around. Rimuru tells them that it can be applied with any means, and tells them to try it out. Kaido thinks for a while, and decides to take the container. The guard in the room with him asks if he's going to trust the words of a monster, but Kaido replies that they don't have time. Kaido covers the container and carries it out of Rimuru's cell. He tells Rimuru to stay in his cell as he runs off with the container and the other guard. Rimuru looks at Kaido and goes back into the cell as he thinks of Kaido as a good guy because he's worried about his friends. Gobta continues to sleep while Rimuru plays with his spider thread ability. He ties up Gobta and hangs him to the ceiling in the room as a form of punishment. Kaido walks in with some dwarves to thank Rimuru for his help. The three dwarves tell him how the potion helped them and thank him again before leaving the prison hall. Kaido opens the cell gate and lets Rimuru out. He eats a meal with Rimuru and tells him that he has never seen such a remarkable potion before. Kaido thanks Rimuru again and tells him to let him know what he needs. After their meal, Kaido says that he understands, and he tells Rimuru that he'll introduce him to a skilled blacksmith, which Rimuru thanks him for. Rimuru looks around the city excitedly as he sees the dwarven technology around him. Kaido calls him over and tells him not to get lost. They enter a building where he sees different armor and swords that make him excited. Kaido takes him to a workshop and tells Rimuru that he can guarantee the skill of the person they're about to meet. They enter the workshop to see a man hammering hot metal on an anvil who tells Kaido to give him a minute. Rimuru apologizes for disturbing his work and Kaido introduces him to Rimuru. Kaijin continues his smithing job until the three dwarf brothers enter the workshop and are surprised to see Rimuru. Kaijin asks if the slime is a friend of theirs and they tell him that he's the slime they told him about. Kaijin leaves his work to thank Rimuru for saving his brothers. He asks Rimuru what he needs, and Rimuru tells him why he's there. Kaijin says that he understands but tells him about how busy he is because of the impossible order a certain minister gave him. Kaijin tells them about how the whole thing happened and how he had to take the impossible order. He tells Rimuru about the spirit ore they need to make the longswords, and the trouble they encountered with the Armorsaurus when they tried to dig some up. The dwarf brothers also say that the mine has been emptied, as they hardly found any spirit ore in it. Rimuru thinks about what they're saying and immediately remembers the Magistone ores he swallowed at Veldora's cave. He begins to laugh aloud while the others wonder what is going on. Rimuru spits out one of them and asks if he can use it. Kaijin is so surprised because of the purity of the ore, but Rimuru tells him to look at it better. Kaijin removes his work goggles and realizes that the ore has upgraded to Magisteel, which Rimuru affirms. Kaijin asks Rimuru what he wants in exchange for it, and Rimuru tells him what he needs. Kaijin beats his chest and declares that it's an easy order. The dwarf brothers get concerned if Kaijin can finish the order in 5 days, to which Kaijin replies that he'd do what he can. Rimuru talks to Great Sage for a while before asking Kaijin if he already made one of the longswords. The dwarf brothers bring it out and Rimuru immediately swallows them. Everyone gets disturbed, but Rimuru tries to calm them. He tells the Great Sage to analyze the sword and make copies with the clusters of Magisteel he has. Great Sage successfully produces the copies and Rimuru spits them out. Everyone in the workshop is surprised as they scream out loud. Kaijin tells Rimuru about a party they're holding to celebrate the delivery of his order. He and the dwarf brothers try to convince Rimuru to go. They tell him about the place they're going and how there are beautiful elves there. Rimuru changes his mind and begins to fantasize about elves. At the Butterflies of the Night, they enter the pub to see different elven girls who welcome them. Rimuru looks at them all as his mind screams elf with excitement. One of the girls calls Rimuru cute as she hurriedly comes over to pick him up. She hugs him tight. Kaijin claims that Rimuru's enjoying himself for someone reluctant to come. He replies to them, which makes Kaijin and the dwarf brothers laugh. They begin to drink as Rimuru enjoys himself on the lap of one of the girls, feeling like he's in heaven. He begins to narrate how fun times don't last as someone arrives at the entrance of the pub. The scene starts at an elven brothel. Kaijin and his brothers sit in between beautiful elven girls, and Kaijin talks with Rimuru. Kaijin laughs aloud and says that Rimuru created copies of what he busted his ass for in seconds. Rimuru compliments the original sword and explains what he did to create the copy. He asks if it's okay, and Kaijin replies that he was a little vexed but says that he'll make another amazing one that he won't be able to copy next time. Kaijin calls it a challenge and continues to drink, while Rimuru also calls for a refill. He talks with the girls and they all completely forget about Gobta, who's still in the prison. Another elven girl in the room calls Rimuru over, and she makes some hand gestures to show what she wants to do. Rimuru, who misinterprets it, begins to have perverted and delusional thoughts of what she wants to do with him. The girl keeps on calling to him while he continues his delusion, and it stops when Rimuru sees a fortune-telling orb in her hand. She asks Rimuru what he wants to know, and the elven girl who's petting him tells her to check who Rimuru is destined to be with. Everyone in the room reacted to what she said and paid attention to what the fortune-telling girl was doing. She makes fun of him for the first time, but she does it the second time. Rimuru wonders if the person is also going to be a slime or something else. The orb begins to show some things, and the image of a lady with some kids shows up. Rimuru thinks about how the lady looks Japanese while Kaijin says that she's a beautiful lady. They continue to have fun until they are interrupted by a man who asks Kaijin if he should be wasting their time there. Kaijin calls the man Minister Vesta and Rimuru begins to think about how Minister Vesta's character is from his looks. Minister Vesta walks up to them as he reminds Kaijin of the task he has, but Kaijin replies that he has sent the longswords to them. Minister Vesta gets surprised and embarrassed because he didn't expect Kaijin to have finished. Minister Vesta begins to rant, while Rimuru thinks to himself if Minister Vesta knowingly gave Kaijin an impossible order. He wonders if the minister guy and Kaijin are on bad terms. Minister Vesta turns to Rimuru after his rants and says that he is worried about him. Minister Vesta calls Rimuru a lowly monster and talks down on him. He turns to the manager and asks her why they let a monster in. The elven lady tries to tell him that he looks harmless and all. She gives him a cup of beer to calm him, but he takes the cup and pours the beer on Rimuru, who's sitting on a girl's lap. Great Sage informs Rimuru of the fruit wine alcohol content in his body, to which he replies that he doesn't need the info. Kaijin suddenly stands and punches Minister Vesta in the face, which surprises everyone in the room. Kaijin calls the minister by name and asks him if he's prepared to pay for treating his guest that way. Vesta asks Kaijin how he could talk to him like that, but Kaijin shuts him up and approaches him to continue. Kaijin's brothers tell him to go easy on Vesta, while Rimuru tells him to go for the body and not the face. Kaijin punches Vesta in the face again, which knocks Vesta and his follower down. Rimuru asks if it's a good idea because the guy is a minister. Kaijin immediately asked Rimuru if he was looking for skilled artisans. He asks Rimuru if he'll settle for him, which surprises Rimuru. Rimuru happily accepts him, but they later get arrested. Kaido asks Kaijin what he was thinking, and Kaijin replies that the moron, Vesta, was rude to his buddy Rimuru, and he gave him a little scolding while some soldiers carry Vesta's unconscious body away from the scene. Kaido tells them not to hold it against him and says that he has to keep them in jail till the trial. He orders one of the guards who pull them with their chains from the scene, including Rimuru. The 5 of them were put in the same jail where Gobta is still sleeping in the hanging position. Rimuru asks why Gobta is still sleeping, while Kaijin begins to express regrets for his actions. He apologizes to the others for dragging them into trouble with him, which they all say is nothing to worry about. Rimuru asks about the trial he heard about, and Kaijin replies that they'll probably just have to pay a fine. Rimuru says that it seems that Vesta has something against him, which Kaijin tells him the reason with his story when he used to be the captain of the Royal Knight. Kaijin tries to make Vesta into a good man in front of Rimuru and says that he'll probably be a better man if Kaijin leaves the country. Kaijin stands and tells Rimuru that he belongs to him, which they shake hands for, and Rimuru affirms. The other 3 ask Rimuru if they can tag along, which makes Kaijin very emotional. Rimuru accepts to take them along, and they all laugh together. At nighttime, everyone sleeps, but Rimuru watches the youngest of the dwarf brothers, Mired, who doesn't talk and observes that he doesn't make any sound in his sleep too. Gobta wakes up from his sleep and asks Rimuru what is going on. Rimuru tells him that they have to leave him there for a while and that he should call his Tempest Wolf if he wants to leave. Gobta begins to rant and ask for help to get down, but Rimuru uses more spider threads to seal his mouth. Rimuru thinks about how he doesn't want him to get involved in the trial issue. The next day at the king's court, everyone involved in the incident gathered in the court surrounded by royal knights. The courtman declares the entry of their king and they all bow as hero King Gazelle Dwargo sits on his throne. Rimuru looks at the king and thinks that he's bad news because he's strong. The courtman declares the beginning of the trial and tells the people to rise. Rimuru thinks about how no one speaks in the trial without the king's permission, which is why they get a proxy for their defense. The proxy of Kaijin twists the story around and claims that Kaijin and his gang went into the establishment to beat up Minister Vesta. Rimuru thinks about what is going on because the proxy is supposed to be defending them while Kaijin whispers that he has been bought. Vesta affirms the words of the proxy and demands strict judgment on them. The courtman gives out their sentences and adjourns the case. The king tells him to wait and he greets Kaijin. They all bow to the king as the courtman permits Kaijin to speak. Kaijin replies to the king in all humility. The king asks him if he is interested in returning to his ranks. Kaijin looks up at the king and asks him to forgive him. He tells the king that he has already found his master and that his sworn oath is his greatest treasure. He says that he won't part with the treasure he has found. One of the knights calls it insolence and the others immediately prepare to attack. King Gazel makes a hand gesture for the knights to stand down and declares that he will pass judgment. The king says that Kaijin and his companions shall be exiled, and he immediately tells them to leave his sight. Rimuru notices the king's sadness, while Kaijin, who's still bowing, cries his eyes out. The courtman declares that the court is adjourned. After everyone leaves the court, King Gazel angrily asks Vesta if he has anything he wishes to tell him. Vesta begins to stammer as he couldn't put words together. The king tells him that he has lost a loyal retainer, and Vesta begins to make excuses that Kaijin wasn't loyal, but soon realizes that the king was talking about him. The courtman shows him the hippocute herb that they got from the slime, which surprises Vesta because they couldn't achieve such purity with their advanced dwarven technology. The king stands and says that his actions have severed their relationship with the slime. King Vesta if he has anything to say, which he replies that he doesn't, as he falls to his knees with tears in his eyes. Vesta begins to think about how he wanted to be useful to the king since he was a little boy. He asks when he chose the wrong path and wonders when he did. Vesta asks for forgiveness for betraying the king's expectations. The king tells him never to show himself before him again, and he thanks Vesta for his service. The king walks out of the court while Vesta kneels there devastated as he continues to cry. Kaido tells Kaijin to take care of himself as they exchange farewells. Kaido tells Rimuru to take care of his brother, and then declares that Kaijin and his companions are exiled by the king's sentence. He walks back into the castle with the other guards, and watches Kaido and the others as the gate closes. Rimuru tells them to move on, and that his friends are waiting for them. At King Gazelle's palace, he asks one of his secret agents if they have apprehended the proxy, and tells them to punish him severely. He also tells them to observe the slime's movements, because he doesn't believe such a monster has been released. He tells them not to be noticed no matter what it takes, which the agent affirms and enters the shadows. King Gazelle says that the slime is a true beast, like the storm dragon Veldora. At the Free Union Bloomend Guild, Guildmaster Fuse reads the report concerning the Eastern Empire. The investigation done by the 3 guild members in the room says that there is no sign of the Eastern Empire trying to use the Great Forest of Jura. Fuse says that the Intelligence Bureau will continue to monitor them, and he asks the 3 guild members in the room about their plight in the Great Forest of Jura. One of them, named Kaval, says that it was a disaster, and the other 2, Aaron and Guido, give their complaints. Kaval tells the guild master that they confirmed the disappearance of Veldora, and they didn't find anything in the cave. The 3 members prepare to leave, but Fuse tells them that he'll give them 3 days off, which surprises them. He tells them what he wants them to investigate next and gives the reasons for it. Fuse tells them to check every part of the forest while they look at him shocked. After the meeting, Kaval and Aaron both begin to complain and rant about how they get worked without enough days off, while Guido walks on looking devastated. Their discussion gets interrupted by a masked girl who asks about their destination and the possibility of them taking her along. Kaval tries to question her, but Aaron immediately accepts to allow her to accompany them. Kaval tries to say that he's the leader, and he has to accept, but Aaron tells him her reason for accepting. She introduces the 3 of them to the masked girl, and the masked girl tells them her name, Shizu. Aaron welcomes her on board, which makes Kaval sigh heavily. He tells Shizu that they're leaving in 3 days before they leave the scene. Rimuru and Ranga stand at a riverbank. Rimuru tells Ranga to watch carefully as he transforms into the Tempest Star Wolf with his mimicry ability. Rimuru activates his black lightning and shoots it at a rock in the river before transforming back to his slime form. It destroys the rock and troubles the water, which surprises Rimuru himself. Ranga praises his master, while Rimuru thinks about how he has to be careful about who he uses. The ability as a rainbow appears. Rimuru rides on Ranga back to the village as he thinks of how everything's so peaceful. They stop at a high region close to the village and look at what's going on there. Rimuru says that everything is looking great as he begins to narrate how Kaijin and the 3 dwarf brothers have helped the village with their skills. Rimuru begins to talk about the surprise he got when he got back from Dworgen. He sees more goblins than usual in the village who welcome him back. Rigurd tells him that they all heard of him and they came to the village to seek protection. Rimuru asks Great Sage about the number of the goblins, and it replies that they are approximately 500, which surprises Rimuru. He asks Great Sage what will happen if turns them away and gets a reply that makes it impossible for him to send them away. He allows the goblins to join the village, and he names them all, which makes him sleep for 3 days again. Rimuru walks around the village to admire the changes taking place, but notices Gobta teaching some little goblins how to summon a Tempest Wolf. Rimuru is surprised when Gobta summons one, and he narrates how Gobta escaped from the prison in Dworgen by summoning his Tempest Wolf and escaping from the city to join up with them. He compliments Gobta in his mind, but his rating of Gobta drops when he realizes that he's not a good teacher. Rigurd rushes over while Rimuru narrates how he has been promoted from Goblin Lord to Goblin King and how it affected his evolution physically. Rigurd reports to Rimuru that they received a message from Rigurd and the security team that says that they've discovered suspicious beings in the forest. Rimuru asks if they are monsters, but Rigurd replies that they are humans. Rigurd gives his opinion about what the humans intend to do. Kaval and his team run away from giant ants that are chasing them. Guido blames Kaval while Eren complains about it as they continue to run. Shizu, who's running with them, stops and unsheathes her sword. The sword starts to release flames and she begins to take down the giant ants. Shizu takes down all the giant ants, while the others look at her shocked. A giant ant tries to ambush Shizu from behind, which the others notify her of. Shizu turned back and tried to attack it, but couldn't fight. Black lightning comes from the sky and erases the giant ant. The shockwave of the black lightning blows off Shizu's mask, while the others go to check up on her. The dust clears out and they see a slime with Shizu's mask. Eren and Kaval comment about a talking slime, which they don't believe. Rimuru asks Shizu if she's okay and gives her back her mask. She replies that she's okay as she collects the mask, while Rimuru remembers her face from the fortune-telling at Dwargon. He thinks about how he meets his destined one early, while she thanks him for saving her. At the Goblin Village, Rigard takes Rimuru to the house where the 4 humans are. He hears them ranting from the outside and asks what is going on. Rigard informs him that they gave them food to eat. Rimuru enters the house thinking of how he recognizes the adventurers. Great Sage reminds him of where he saw the trio. Rimuru watches Shizu eat with her mask on, and he thinks about how skilled she is. Rigord apologizes for interrupting their meal as he introduces Rimuru to the guest as their master. The 3 adventurers react, and they give reasons for their reactions. Rimuru tries to make a joke with his introduction to show that he's harmless, but only Shizu reacts to it. Kaval and his team apologize and thank Rimuru for saving them. Rimuru asks them about what brings them to the forest, which makes them introduce themselves to him. Kaval introduces their temporary 4th member, and she tells Rimuru her name. Rimuru begins to think about how the name and actions of his destined one look more Japanese. Rimuru asks them to continue, and Kaval immediately tells Rimuru about everything that brings them to the forest. Rimuru replies that he understands as he thinks about how large the effect of Veldora's absence is. He tells them that they're in the middle of building their village, and asks if the guild is against it. Kaval and his team think about it and reply that the guild doesn't have a say about it. Rimuru suggests that they spend the night there and get some good rest, which they all thank him for. He tells Rigurd and Rigur to treat them well, which they respond positively to. Shizu watches the sunset from an area close to the village. Rimuru hops to where she is and tells her that there's something he'd like to ask her. He tries to ask if she is Japanese, but she interrupts him and says that the line he used during his introduction was from a game. She tells him that she hasn't played the game, but says that she heard it from someone in her country as she picks him up from the ground. Rimuru thinks about how he has been held by many beautiful girls in his slime form. Shizu asks Rimuru if he's from Japan, and he affirms it. She asks him how he got there, and he tells her his story. She says that he is reincarnated as she rubs his smooth body. Rimuru asks if it was different for her, and she replies that she's a summon. Rimuru remembers what Veldora told him about the summons. He thinks of how Shizu is a weapon of the summoner and the curse that Veldora said, but he decides not to talk to her about it yet. Rimuru asks her when she was summoned, and Shizu tells him about it. She tells him about the bombs raining on them and everything that happened. Rimuru apologizes for asking her a sensitive question that involved her mother. Rimuru tells Shizu that he's going to show her something fun. He tells Great Sage that he'd like to use thought communication to show Shizu some of his memories. Great Sage confirms his request and takes them to a starry plain where they look at civilized Japan. Shizu gets excited as she sees the skyscrapers and peaceful country. Rimuru tells her that it's Japan after the war, and she wishes that she could show it to her mother. Rimuru talks about peace and says that he wants to bring that peace to the world they're in now. Shizu comments about his ambition and says that she hopes it happens. She suddenly coughs and gets forced out of the thought communication plan. Rimuru asks if she's okay as she gasps. Shizu apologizes and says that she thinks she's fine with a smile on her face as she puts on her mask. Kaijin calls Rimuru and says that they need to talk to him about where they're going to build the new house. They exchange greetings and Rimuru follows Kaijin, who teases him. Shizu continues to look at the sunset. She remembers the scenes of how Japan was bombarded by an air raid and how she was summoned as flames engulfed her younger self. She gets summoned, but the summoner claims that she's another failure. He turns to leave the room, but she asks for help. He looks back and realizes that she has a fire affinity. The man summons the fire spirit, Ifrit, and he offers her body to him. He tells Ifrit to use her well, and it immediately approaches her to take over her body. The episode continues from the scene where Shizu gets summoned and possessed by Ifrit. The summoner stares at Shizu as a feather enters the scene. The feather lands beside Shizu and Koenig appears from it. Koenig declares that he, the great sorcerer, has come to pay his respects. He points to the summoner named Leon and tells him that he's going to defeat him to become the demon lord himself. Leon calls Koenig a lowly creature and says that it's a good opportunity to test Ifrit. He orders Ifrit to attack Koenig, but Shizu doesn't know what to do. Leon's eyes begin to glow, and Ifrit immediately takes over Shizu's body. Koenig releases his feather attack, but he and his attack get erased by a massive attack from Ifrit. Leon laughs and asks for her name, which she tries to tell him. He names her Shizu from what he heard her say. Shizu walks through a forest and notices a little girl feeding a baby monster. Shizu makes some noise unintentionally, and the girl immediately notices her. She begs Shizu not to tell anyone about it, and Shizu tells her she won't. Shizu asks if they can both take care of the baby monster, which the girl accepts. Shizu feeds the monster and plays with it. Shizu asks the girl for its name, and she replies that monsters don't have names. They both discuss the name issue, and Shizu names the monster Pitsu. Pitsu immediately glows, and they realize that it has gotten a little bigger. The girl named Pirino carries Pitsu, and Shizu reminds her that she can't take Pitsu to the castle. Pirino replies with her reasons, and says that they'll allow Pitsu to be her familiar. Pitsu snarls at Leon at the castle, while Pirino tries to calm it down. Ifrit takes over Shizu's body and stands in front of them. It says that they are enemies, and immediately sets both Pirino and Pitsu ablaze until they are completely consumed. Leon leaves the scene as Shizu falls to her knees, looking devastated. She begins to think about what she just did and how her body moved on its own. She cries bitterly at the spot and immediately wakes up from her dream. She looks around where she is and discovers she's sleeping in a room with Eren, who's sleeping soundly on another bed. Shizu starts to get the feeling she gets when she can't control her body, and tries very hard to fight it. Later that day, Shizu looks at the village from a place close by. Rimuru goes up to where she is riding on Ranga and asks if she likes the village. Shizu removes her mask and replies that she likes it with a smile on her face. Rimuru tells her that she is welcome to stay in the village as long as she likes. Shizu thanks him and says that she has to go. She tells him her reason and her goal, which is to find the man that summoned her. Rimuru asks her what she'd do if she finds him, but she doesn't reply and continues to look away. Rimuru leaves the topic and tells her that she's welcome to the village anytime, which he makes Ranga affirm. Shizu thanks Rimuru and also hugs Ranga to thank him. At the girls' guest room in the Goblin Village, Eren, who's combing her hair in front of a mirror, asks Shizu why she isn't following them back to Blumend. Shizu looks at her surprised, while Eren continues to say that it'll be awful to say goodbye. Eren tries to convince her to continue with them, but Shizu shakes her head and talks about why she can't continue journeying with them. The other team members wait for the girls outside with Rigurd, Rigger, and Rimuru, who are sitting on Rigurd's shoulder. Rigger announces the arrival of the girls. Guido and Kaval begin to complain about how women take so much time to get ready and how they have to wait for long. Eren soon notices that Shizu stopped walking and turns to look at her. Shizu begins to struggle with her body's control as the others call her name, worried. Her mask cracks, and she releases a pillar of fire into the sky. The clouds change form and they become darkened as everyone at the scene watches what's going on. Shizu starts to float and releases a fire explosion that blows them away. Kaval soon realizes that Shizu is Shizue Izawa, the conqueror of flames. Guido and Eren both say they think they know about her, and they call her the legendary hero from 50 years ago. Rimuru immediately orders Rigurd and Rigur to evacuate everyone, which they reluctantly accept after he claims that it's an order. Rimuru confirms if Ranga is there, and tells Ranga who's in his shadow what to do once things start. Shizu's cracked mask falls to the ground from where she's floating in the sky with fire surrounding her. Rimuru looks at her and sees how tears fall from her red eyes, and how the tears evaporate. The fire engulfs her and she transforms into the fire spirit, Ifrit. Eren and Guido affirm that Shizu is the legendary hero, and they start to talk about how they can't win. Guido begins to talk about how he had a good life. Ifrit summons some salamanders, which release a blast that blows Kaval's block and his team away. The fire monsters set the buildings in the village ablaze, which pisses off Rimuru. He tells the adventurers that they should get away, but they decide not to leave Shizu behind, stating that she is one of them. Rimuru tells them to be careful, and thinks to himself that they are good people as they prepare to take on Ifrit. Rimuru asks Ifrit what he's after, but Ifrit shoots a fireball at him. Rimuru dodges and counters with his water blade attack that evaporates before it can touch Ifrit. Ifrit's summoned salamanders attack Rimuru. Eren shoots her ice attack at them and tells Rimuru that she and her team will take care of them. Kaval, who tries to reiterate that he's the leader, accepts her words as Eren continues to shoot her ice attack at them. Rimuru summons Ranga from his shadow and begins to ride him around. He instructs Ranga to evade the attacks of the salamanders chasing them, and he would do the attacking. The salamanders continue to attack them, while Rimuru thinks of how to defeat them. He suggests shooting all the water in his stomach at them. Great Sage immediately explains how it would work, and asks if he wants to use it. Rimuru asks if it would destroy the salamanders, which Great Sage affirms, and tells him the side effect of using it. The side effect surprises Rimuru, and he scolds Great Sage for making it an option. Rimuru sees Eren shooting her icicle lance attack at one of the salamanders, which impales it and damages it. Rimuru asks if it is working, and Great Sage immediately explains how it is working. Rimuru tells Eren to shoot the icicle lance at him, which she reluctantly does. Rimuru swallows it, and Great Sage analyzes it. Ranga jumps over the two salamanders behind them, while Rimuru releases tiny ice crystals on them. The tiny crystals produce many icicle lances, which immediately impale the salamanders and destroy them. The last salamander flies towards Kaval's team and dodges all of Eren's icicle lances. It starts to self-destruct and explodes in front of them, while Kaval tries to use his body to shield his teammates. Rimuru goes to check on them and realizes that they're in bad shape. He orders Ranga to get them somewhere safe. Ranga is reluctant to leave Rimuru behind, but Rimuru forces him to go, which he later accepts. Ranga tells him to be well, and Rimuru replies that he will defeat Ifrit. Ranga leaves the scene with Kaval and his team, while Rimuru hops over to confront Ifrit. Ifrit creates clones of himself, and they all fly down surrounding Rimuru. The ground beneath them begins to boil. Rimuru takes a tornado shape and releases icicles at all the Ifrit clones surrounding him. He soon notices a magic circle beneath him, which Ifrit activates, and a pillar of fire comes out of the ground. The fire engulfs Rimuru as Ranga, and the other villagers watch from where they are. Rimuru begins to talk like someone who's dying with regrets, but soon notices that he's not receiving damage. Great Sage tells him about his thermal fluctuation resistance ability and jeers at him. Rimuru declares that it's easy mode if he can nullify the fire and claims that everything is going according to plan. Ifrit, who's standing in front of the pillar of fire, turns back to leave, but gets tied up by Rimuru's spider thread. The surprised Ifrit tries to burn the spider thread, but it doesn't burn. Rimuru says that they both underestimated each other, but Ifrit underestimated him more. Ifrit shoots a fire breath attack at Rimuru, but he doesn't get damaged. Rimuru says that it's his turn, and Great Sage asks if he wants to use the Predator skill. Rimuru affirms, and he immediately swallows Ifrit. Rimuru sees Shizu on the floor and goes over to help her. In Rimuru's stomach, Ifrit looks at the large, dark world he's in and shoots out a fire attack to check the end of the void he's in, but the attack doesn't reach anywhere. Veldora tells him to give up from the darkness and tells him that he cannot break out of the place. He says that Ifrit is not a match for Rimuru and claims that Rimuru is his sworn friend. Veldora introduces himself to the shocked Ifrit and says that it's a pleasure to face him while laughing aloud. The episode begins in the room where Shizu is lying on a bed. Controlled sunlight enters the room from the top of the ceiling. Shitsu thanks Rimuru, who's sitting beside her. She says that she almost killed someone dear to her again. She asks Rimuru if she can tell him some things, and she replies that she shouldn't talk too much. Shizu says that she wants people to know her story, which Rimuru decides to listen to. Rimuru narrates everything Shizu told him, while the others rebuild the village. Shizu tells Rimuru how she met the hero when she was left behind by the Demon Lord. Shizu continues to narrate everything that happened and how the hero took her in. Shizu talks about the mask he got from the hero and what the mask does. Shizu talks about how she traveled with the hero, and Rimuru concludes that it's time she got her Conqueror Flames title. Shizu says that she enjoyed journeying with the hero, but she disappeared, leaving her behind. Rimuru asks her why, but Shizu replies that she doesn't know why. She begins to wonder why the hero left her behind, and she tells Rimuru that she's certain they'll meet again. Shizu continues to tell Rimuru the reason she decided to get stronger. She says that she worked hard for decades, and asks if it's impressive, which Rimuru affirms. She tells Rimuru how it got difficult for her to control Ifrit as she grew older, which scared her. She tells Rimuru how she retired and became an instructor at a school. Rimuru asks if there are schools, which she affirms, and tells him the location of the school. She tells Rimuru that it's a school for kids from other worlds, which Rimuru comments about. She says that it was one of the kids who taught her the video game line Rimuru quoted when he was introducing himself to them. The both of them say the line together and laugh while she says that it was fun, as she thinks of the peaceful days when was taking care of the kids. Shizu tells Shizu that the children eventually went off on their own, and that one of them became the Grandmaster. Rimuru wonders what Grandmaster means, which Shizu enlightens him about. Rimuru calls it a big deal, while Shizu continues to talk about why she decided to go on a journey to search for the man who summoned her. Rimuru asks if she wants revenge. Shizu replies that she doesn't know but says that there's something she wants to find out from him. Shizu thinks about Caval's team, which she followed to the forest to continue her journey. She says they are nice people, and that it was a little danger-prone, which Rimuru affirms. Shizu says that it was fun and begins to think about the present. Shizu, who's still lying on the bed, asks Rimuru for his name, which he replies. She asks for his real name, and Rimuru tells her. Shizu tells Rimuru her real name and immediately closes her eyes to sleep. Rimuru tells her to sleep while she asks him if she can ask for a favor. Rimuru tells her to ask, and she immediately asks him to eat her. She talks about how she was happy when Rimuru ate Ifrit, who was like a curse on her. She continues to say that she dislikes the world, but she doesn't abhor it just like the man that summoned her. Shizu says that she doesn't want to be absorbed by the world, and she tells Rimuru that she has a last request. She places her hand on his head and asks if he would let her rest inside him. Rimuru replies that it's okay, and she begins to cry. Rimuru asks what the name of her summoner is, and she replies that it's Leon Cromwell. He asks her what she wants to find out from him. Shizu says that she just wants him to acknowledge that she's human and that the kids can be saved. Rimuru puts his slime hand on her and swears to complete her request in his name. Shizu thanks him and passes away as her body transforms into that of her older self. Rimuru calls her his destined one and tells her to rest in peace within him. Great Sage asks if he wants to use the Predator skill, which Rimuru affirms while thinking of his reason. Rimuru engulfs her body to swallow her. Shizu's happy dream begins when she meets her mother after some offsets where Perino and the hero fade away. Caval and his team walk towards the house Shizu is in, while discussing if she's okay. They stand in front of the house with Ranga, while Rigurd meets them there and talks about a change of clothes for Shizu. They move the clothes covering the room only to see a little naked human alone in the room. The human, who looks like a little version of Shizu, looks back as tears drop from his eyes, while the others look at him surprised. Rimuru, who's in human form, tells them everything that happened. Gibo questions Rimuru about his identity, while Rigurd and Ranga affirm that it is him. Rimuru transforms into his slime form to prove that he's the one that Caval and the others comment about. Eren asks if Rimuru ate Shizu the way he ate Ifrit. Rimuru replies and apologizes to them for not asking them because she was a travel companion of theirs. Rimuru apologizes to Eren and tells her that Shizu said she had fun traveling with them, but they are danger-prone. Eren and Gibo stare at Caval as they begin to blame each other for dangerous things that happened in the past. Rimuru thinks of how they are arguing and says that it's better than them being all sober. Caval and his team thank Rimuru for his help and say that they'll be on their way. Rimuru asks about where they are going back to, and they tell him about the guild and the reports they'll make when they get back. Caval asks if Rimuru can do a little favor, which is to take a human form. Rimuru says he can, and he immediately transforms to his human form. He asks them what they want. The three of them bow and thank him while referring to him as Shizu as they talk about how they'll improve their ways. Eren, who's crying, hugs Rimuru and says that she was like a big sister to her while Rimuru pats her back. Rimuru thinks of how he's glad that the three of them were Shizu's last companions. Rimuru talks about how shabby their gear is looking, which they all say is mean. Rimuru takes them to the smithy, where he gives them new gears as parting gifts, while they comment about the wonderful armor they have on. Rimuru tells them that they were made by the artisans in his village. He calls them all out and introduces them to Caval and his team. The three of them make a big fuss as they talk about Kaijin and the dwarf brothers who are famous artisans. Caval and his team wave at Rimuru and the others as they leave the village, while Rimuru narrates how strong and resilient they are. Rimuru continues to narrate about a girl, Shizu, who obtained the power of flames and how she used that power to help the people. He talks about how the flames consumed her until she could no longer control them. He says that the name of the girl is Shizue Izawa, who was a champion that housed Ifrit while praying to the gravestone they made up for her at the spot where she usually watches the sunset. Rimuru thinks about the promise he made to Shizu and says that he's a man who keeps his promises as he begins to narrate his story from when he got stabbed to the present moment. Rimuru transforms back to his slime form and says that it's more convenient. An orc walks through a very hot desert-like wasteland. He falls after walking for a while. A masked man walks up to where the orc is lying and tells him that he'll give him a name and some food. The orc asks him who he is, and the man replies that he's Gelmud. He tells the orc that he can think of him as his father. The orc stares at him without replying, which makes Gelmud ask if he wants to die there. The orc asks Gelmud to give him a name and food. Gelmud places his hand on the orc and names him Geld. He tells Geld that he'll take possession of the great forest of Jura and become the orc disaster. He takes out a piece of raw meat and offers it to Geld, who struggles to stand and eat the meat. Rimuru narrates how the development of the goblin village continues to progress. He talks about how Kaijin and the dwarf brothers made clothing, tools, and built houses for them. He also narrates how Rigurd, the Goblin King, and the Goblin Lords under him work out a system of ruling the village. Rimuru says that everything is going great because everyone is doing their jobs without his orders. Rimuru thinks about the important thing he wants to do. He goes to the front of a house and looks around to make sure anyone isn't watching before entering. Rimuru spits out Shizu's mask and says that he'll take care of her keepsake for her. Rimuru laughs and uses Mimic to transform into a human. He checks out his important senses and compares them to when he's in the slime form. He asks Great Sage if he can use Ifrit's body double since he ate Ifrit. Great Sage affirms that it has analyzed Ifrit's ability. Rimuru immediately makes and checks it out, only to find out that he looks a lot like Shizu, and he doesn't have a gender in his human form. He checks out adult versions of himself, both masculine and feminine. Rigurd comes to give his report to Rimuru, who compliments his good work. Rigurd asks if Rimuru doesn't need food. Rimuru says that he can't taste anything as a slime, but remembers that he has a human form now. The excited Rimuru tells Rigurd that he'll start eating with them. Rigurd says that he'll go prepare a lavish dinner for the night, which Rimuru tells him to. Rimuru gets excited and begins to think of what he wants to eat now since he can taste it. Rimuru is particular about eating rice and making a rice field. He meets and thanks Rigurd and his team, who are in charge of finding food for their good work. Rigurd says that they're heading out to find food, and Rimuru tells them to hunt well, because they'll be having a lavish feast. Rigurd talks about the meal he's going to make for Rimuru and how the prey has been abundant in the forest. Rimuru gets worried about them and summons Ranga. He tells Ranga to accompany them as extra security. Rimuru visits the cave where Veldora was sealed. He plans to test out the unique skill he received from Shizu in a place that wouldn't disturb anyone. He looks at the surface of a water pond in the cave to see a reflection of Shizu, and he thinks about how the skill, Degenerate, was important to Shizu. Rimuru explains how the skill works, and he produces a new extra skill named Black Flames in the process. He thinks about how he has to be careful when using the skill while putting off the black flames surrounding him. He thinks of how he's thankful to Shizu as he takes out the mask he got from her and talks about the mask's power to suppress magic. Rimuru puts on the mask and asks how it is. Great Sage tells him that his aura has been completely erased and tells him people will perceive him as human. Rimuru decides to wear it wherever he goes, and checks out himself on the water's surface. Rimuru receives thought communication from Ranga, which indicates a request for aid. Rimuru runs out of the cave to help them. Gobta tries to attack someone, but he gets cut and knocked back. Rimuru reaches the scene to see his people on the ground. He checks up on Gobta, who's ranting, and says that his injuries are not deep. He walks away from him while he apologizes for offending him earlier. Rimuru throws some potion at him to heal him. He walks towards the horned monsters that beat down Gobta, only to notice Ranga fighting two other horned monsters who are being assisted by another horned girl that uses magic. Rimuru orders Ranga to come over, which he immediately does. Ranga apologizes to his master for allowing such things to happen, even with his presence, while Rimuru sees Rigurd taking on another horned girl. He tells Rigurd to also come over and he immediately retreats. He kneels in front of Rimuru and apologizes. Rimuru pours some potion on him to heal him completely and asks what happened to the others who are lying on the ground. Rigurd tells him that the horned girl that uses magic puts them to sleep while all the horned monsters come together to confront Rimuru and his people. Rigurd says that it's humiliating, stating that he didn't think they'd run into ogres. Rimuru looks at the horned monsters and thinks of how they don't look like the game image of ogres he has. Rimuru looks at their armor and weapons for a while. Rimuru thinks about how the ogres didn't injure any of his people fatally even though they're stronger. He proceeds to try and make peace after thinking for a while. One of the ogres tells him to reveal his real self and calls him an evil Majin. Rimuru asks him why he called him that, and the ogre replies with his reasons, while some of the other ogres tell Rimuru to reveal his real identity. Rimuru tries to tell the ogres to listen, but their leader unsheathes his sword and says that they have no intention to listen. He claims that the mask says it all, but Rimuru tries to tell them that the mask is a keepsake and that they're making a mistake. The ogre leader points his sword at Rimuru and says some mean things to him while saying that he'd have his head. Ranga asks his master what they're going to do. Rimuru tells him to take on the female ogre that uses magic and that he shouldn't kill her. He tells Ranga that he would take care of the rest, which Ranga asks him about. Rimuru replies that it's not a problem and says that he won't look. The leader of the ogres tells Rimuru that he's underestimating them. He immediately attacks Rimuru with a heavy sword strike. Rimuru dodges him and takes out 3 of the other members with different skills he got from monsters in the cave where Veldora was sealed. Rimuru asks the other ogres about what is going to happen. The old ogre who's standing beside his leader mentions all the skills Rimuru used and monsters that use the skills, which makes Rimuru surprised. The old ogre tells his young master to be careful because their enemy may have other monster abilities, which makes Rimuru think to himself about not giving out too much away. Rimuru asks if they can stop and listen to what he has to say, but the ogre young master accuses him of being one of the orcs who defeated his people. Rimuru tries to defend himself, but the young master continues to say that he's the evil mageon that helped the orcs. Rimuru gets ambushed from behind by the old ogre who cuts off his arm and claims that he's going senile because he couldn't take Rimuru's head instead. Ranga and the others get worried about Rimuru, but he tells them not to worry. Rimuru thinks about how the old ogre successfully ambushed him, while the young master talks down on Rimuru for losing his arm. Rimuru picks up his arm and absorbs it into his body to use ultra-speed regeneration. His arm grows back immediately, which surprises the 2 ogres facing him. Rimuru laughs and asks if they think they've defeated him because they cut his arm. The ogre young master calls Rimuru a foul beast and activates his ogre flame ability that he uses to surround Rimuru. He wonders if he defeated the enemy, but Rimuru walks out of the fire, stating that fire doesn't work on him. He continues to say that they're right for saying that he underestimated them. Rimuru takes off the mask and tells them that he'll show them what he's like when he's serious. He releases his aura and activates his black flames into the sky, which everyone at the scene looks at in awe. The female ogre that uses magic explains how the massive black flames work and how he creates them from his pure strength. Rimuru says that he'll show them his true power. He raises his other hand and immediately summons black lightning that destroys a large piece of rock close to them. Rimuru, who's shocked by the effect of the black lightning, wonders if he shouldn't have used it. He asks if they still want to fight, which makes the ogre young master grit his teeth. Rimuru thinks that he's scared and hopes that he'll surrender. The old ogre tells the young master to flee with the princess and that he'll end the fight. The young master tells him to be quiet. He tells Rimuru that they're no match for him, but also says that his pride as the next leader of the powerful ogres won't let him flee. He takes up his weapon to continue fighting even if he's not going to win, while Rimuru thinks about how his strategy backfires. The ogre princess comes to stop her brother and convinces him that Rimuru may not be the enemy. Rimuru asks if they're willing to listen to him as he takes out his black flames. The young master asks Rimuru who he is, and Rimuru replies that he's just a slime, while transforming back to his slime form. He jumps on Ranga's back and takes out the mask to show them. The ogres check the mask, which is similar to that of the person that attacked them, but Rimuru's own has an anti-aura ability that the attacker didn't have. The young master of the ogres kneels in front of Rimuru to beg for forgiveness as he apologizes. Rimuru accepts his apology and invites them to his village to talk since the place they are isn't appropriate for talking. Rimuru says that he wants to hear about their story. The ogre young master tries to make up excuses that they injured his people, but he evades it and tells them about the feast they'll be having at night in his village. Rimuru explains everything that happened before they started to walk towards the village. Rimuru asks the ogre's young master for his name, to which he replies that they don't have names. Rimuru remembers that most of them don't have names and says that it's all right as they continue to walk. At nighttime, the goblins eagerly watch Rimuru take his first bite of the feast to confirm his taste. Rimuru takes a bite and says that it's delicious, which makes them all scream out in celebration. Rimuru picks up more meat to eat while thinking of how he couldn't taste anything in his slime form. He says it's bliss and that it's so great to be alive. The people raise their cups to cheer as they feast and enjoy themselves. Kaijin is surprised when the ogre young master tells him about the orcs that attacked his people. Kaijin asks if such a thing is possible, and Gobta asks if it's strange. Kaijin tells Gobta that ogres are immeasurably stronger than orcs, and that he doesn't believe that a weak would attack the ogres. The ogre young master says they did come, and he narrates how the orcs attacked their village out of nowhere. He continues to say that the orcs had armor and overwhelming numbers that they used to overrun his village. Kaijin asks about the armor the orcs were wearing, and he replies the same type that humans wear. Kaijin thinks about it while Rigurd says that the orcs may not be working alone, which Kaijin supports with a reason. The young master talks about the high-level masked mageon he saw with the orcs when he went to check on his father. Rigurd says that it is why the ogres mistook Rimuru for a mageon, which the young master affirms. Gobta, who's eating, asks what it all means, and Rigurd guesses that the orcs have possibly sided with one of the demon lords. They all begin to think about the demon lord, and Rigurd asks about the mageon. The young master says that he doesn't know, but continues to say that there are only 6 survivors from his 300 brethren. Rimuru interrupts and says that it's the reason why he seems upset as he walks over to where they're discussing. Rimuru and the young master discuss the food and the young master's sister. Rimuru asks what they plan to do in the future, and the young master replies that he intends to build their strength and take the orcs on again. Rimuru questions him some more, and soon realizes that he doesn't have a plan. Rimuru tells the young master that he has a suggestion. He asks if they want to be his subordinates, and he tells the young master the perks of it, which include clothing, food, and shelter. The young master says that he doesn't want to drag Rimuru's village into their revenge, but Rimuru lets him know that his village isn't completely safe. Also, if the orcs intend to conquer the great forest of Jura, Rimuru says that he wants to build their numbers too, and that he'll fight with them because he never abandons his friends. The young master says that he understands and asks for some time to think about it. Rimuru replies to him positively and stands to go eat more meat. The young master walks into the woods thinking about what to do. He stops walking as he notices one of his subordinates who tells him that the offer isn't bad, but they'll do as he and the princess wishes. The young master continues to walk into the dark forest. He punches a tree and wishes that he was stronger. The next day, the young master goes to see Rimuru, and he tells him about the ogres. He says that they're willing to team up and that their contract lasts only until they defeat the orcs' leader. Rimuru tells them that they can do whatever they want after that, and he lists the possible things they can do then. The young master kneels before Rimuru and says that he'd like to accept his offer. Rimuru thinks about the young master's feelings, which makes him want to do anything to get revenge for his people. Rimuru, who's now in human form, tells the young master to call in the other ogres, while he thinks of how he'll help the ogres not regret their decision. The ogres enter the room, and Rimuru tells them that he'd name them, to prove that they're his subordinates. The ogres get surprised as Rimuru says that it's difficult to communicate without names. The princess tries to tell Rimuru about the great risk involved, but Rimuru thinks about their few numbers and underestimates the risk. The young master accepts that they'll accept the names, and the old ogre says that they'll follow their young master. Rimuru starts to name them, but soon enters sleep mode. In the sleep mode, Rimuru hears 2 ladies talk about how they'll take care of him. Rimuru wakes up to see himself on a female ogre's leg, who he named Shion. He gets greeted by the young master of the ogres who kneels before him. He tells Rimuru about how he has evolved into a Kijin, and that he has assumed the name, Benimaru, that he was given. Rimuru remembers the things that happened vividly, but wonders why he is now Kijin. Great Sage explains what Kijin is to him, while Rimuru checks how the changes in Benimaru's body are. The other ogres tell Rimuru the names he gave to them, while he continues to check out the changes that occurred on their bodies. Rimuru asks about the 6th one as he notices that there are only 5 of them. Benimaru replies that he has been spending a lot of time at Kaijin's workshop. The 6th member enters to greet Rimuru, and his physical changes satisfy Rimuru just like the others. The orcs continue their invasive progress as they march through the great forest of Jura, while some lizard men watch them from hidden locations. Lake Sis, in the middle of the great forest of Jura. The lizardmen control the vast land around Lake Sis. The lizardmen scouts come to inform their leaders of what they saw in the forest. The vassals and leaders of the lizardmen discuss the number of the orcs and the possibility of an orc lord leading them. The king of the lizardmen says that they'll need to find backup and calls out to his son. His son enters the court and tells his father to refer to him by the name he was given by Lord Gelmud. Gabiru kneels to listen to what his father wants to say. At Rimuru's village, the old ogre, Hakuro, takes on some young goblins while he teaches them how to fight with wooden swords. Rimuru watches the scene as he thinks about how Gobta and the other kids want to learn from Hakuro, who's a tough coach. Benimaru tells Rimuru about the Orc Lord. Rimuru asks if Benimaru knows any reason the orcs attacked his village. Benimaru tells Rimuru about the Magin that came to their village to name them, but he rejected them because he didn't trust them. He says that the Magin cursed him when he was leaving. Benimaru struggles to remember the name of the Magin, which Soe appears from the shadows to say. Rimuru thinks about the name Gelmud as he tries to remember where he heard it from. Rimuru remembers that Rigur told him that Gelmud named his dead brother, and he wonders why he just goes around naming monsters. Sue tells Rimuru that he has brought a report. He says that he witnessed a group of lizardmen who usually live in marshlands and decided to make the report. Sue continues to say that the lizardmen are attempting to negotiate with a goblin village nearby, and that they might one day come to their village too. All the goblin kids training with Hakuru lie on the ground exhausted. Gabiru, who's journeying with some other lizard men, talks about what his father said about making alliances with other races just to take on orcs. He talks down on his father, while some of his company praise and exalt him because he's named. Gabiru begins to have narcissistic thoughts that he's great because of the words of his people. He tells the lizard men accompanying him that it seems that his father is getting old. He continues to say that he would drive the orcs away to show his father that he is worthy to take the throne while he can retire with rest of mind. The lizard men hail him as he rallies them to ride on with him. Rimuru thinks about how it's been a while since Benimaru and the other ogres joined the village. The dwarf brothers praise Shuna's silkwork as they check out what she has already made. Rimuru enters the room complimenting Shuna's work too. The dwarf brothers greet Rimuru while Shuna runs over to hug Rimuru, who's sitting in Cheyon's arms. Rimuru asks her about how things are going, and she tells him that the weaving loom that Kaijin made for her is very easy to use. Rimuru says he's glad and says that he's depending on her to make clothes for everyone. Shuna replies to him positively with a smile on her flustered face. Shion tells Rimuru that they should leave so that their food doesn't get cold, but Shuna stops her to ask about her secretarial job. Rimuru narrates how Shion declared herself as his secretary and how he accepted her because she looked like one. Shuna holds Rimuru and says that she wouldn't mind taking care of him herself, while Shion replies that she will take good care of him herself. The two of them continue their rivalry, while the dwarf brothers watch the exciting scene while stroking their beards. Shuna asks Rimuru who he'd prefer to take care of him, and he gives a satisfying reply that stops their argument. Rimuru enters the dining hall to see Benimaru, Hakuryu, and Sue. They ask if he has come to eat, and he replies that Shion cooked for him. The others start to avoid the conversation, while giving off suspicious behaviors. Sue uses the body double ability, which impresses Rimuru. He says that he wants to go scout the surrounding area as he teleports away from the scene. Shion tells Rimuru that she'll go bring the food while he transforms into his human form. He begins to wonder why the others are reacting the way they're doing. Rimuru begins to suspect what's going on as Shion arrives with the food. He sees that she's not capable of cooking, and immediately understands why the others are avoiding the conversation. Rimuru looks at the food as he takes a spoon to eat but contemplates if he should eat it. He asks Great Sage for help. The Great Sage gives him instructions that'll save his life, which he immediately does. Rimuru opens his eyes to see that he has put the spoon into Gobta's mouth. Gobta screams as he falls to the ground. He rolls on the ground, holding his neck as he struggles to breathe until he faints. Rimuru scolds Shion, and he puts Benimaru in charge of tasting the food she prepares. Gabiru and the other lizard men continue to gain the cooperation of goblin villages around. They check the number of goblins that they have with them. One of the lizard men hails Gabiru for making 7,000 goblins cooperate with them. Gabiru tells his people that his best efforts are being rewarded. His minions continue to hype him up and remind him that he will be their chief soon. Rimuru responds to them and begins his narcissistic thoughts. He asks them about the next village they'll be going to. His minions talk about the last settlement, which is a village of goblins that have tamed direwolves and that the leader is a slime. Gabiru suggests that they make the slime work for them, and that way, the direwolves will also work for them. The minions hype his suggestion, and they all begin to hail him. At Kaijin's workshop, Kurobe questions Kaijin about some things related to forging, while Rimuru watches them. Rimuru narrates how they both hit it off immediately, and how they've been discussing the technical issue for a long time. Rigurd enters the workshop to tell Rimuru that an envoy of the lizardmen named Gabiru has arrived. Rimuru leaves the workshop on Rigurd's shoulder. Benimaru, Shion, and Hakuryu ask if they can accompany him, which Rimuru tells them that they can. Rimuru wonders if the lizardmen will be friends or foes. Rimuru asks the lizardmen who the envoy is. The lizardmen begin to stomp their spears on the ground as they part the way for Gabiru to enter the scene on his lizard. While Rimuru wonders what the dramatic entry is for, Gabiru raises his hand to stop his minions stomping. He jumps off the lizard he's riding and lands in front of Rimuru and his company. Gabiru introduces himself to them and declares that they'll work under him dramatically, while his minion kneels and continues to hype him. Shion angrily starts to squeeze Rimuru, who's in her arm, while Rimuru tries to call to her. Rimuru moves to Benimaru's arm, while Shion apologizes. Rigurd tries to tell Gabiru that the request is too sudden. Gabiru replies with the whole orc situation, and claims that they are better off serving him because he'll protect them while striking his narcissistic pose again. He calls them weaklings, but soon realizes that they don't look like weaklings. Gabiru immediately sits with minions to discuss with them, stating that he doesn't see any goblins, Rimuru thinks about how uniting with the lizard men will work for them, but also thinks about how he doesn't want someone like Gabiru watching his back. He thinks of what Napoleon said about the fear of an incompetent ally. Gabiru stands in front of them and makes another suggestion that pisses off Shion, who starts to squeeze Rimuru again. Benimaru smiles and asks Rimuru if he can kill Gabiru, which Rimuru affirms without understanding what he wants to do. Rimuru suddenly realizes as Benimaru walks towards Gabiru and tells him to stop. Rimuru tells Gabiru that they didn't tame the direwolves, but they made them their allies, and he claims that he was the one who did it. Gabiru laughs and says that a slime can't. Rimuru summons Ranga and tells him that the lizard men want to talk with him. Ranga stands in front of Gabiru and immediately uses the menace skill. Benimaru asks Rimuru about Ranga's size. Rimuru tells him that it's Ranga's true size and that the large size is useful for intimidating people. Ranga tells Gabiru that his master has ordered him to hear what he has to say. Gabiru compliments Ranga's elegance while Rimuru thinks about how he didn't cower in fear like the other lizardmen. Gabiru talks down on Ranga for serving a slime and claims that he'll defeat the slime to save him from the deception he's in. Ranga and Rimuru get angered by Gabiru's words while the other lizardmen hype Gabiru. Ranga gets angry at Gabiru for insulting his master while the stupid Gabiru continues to strike narcissistic poses. Gobta reaches the scene while they all wonder why he's still alive. Great Sage explains what happened to Gobta. Ranga comes over to pick Gobta to pit him against Gabiru, stating that he'll consider his offer if he wins. Gabiru talks down on Rimuru again, which makes Gabiru tell Gobta not to hold back. Rimuru tells Gobta the thing that will happen if he wins, and how he'll have to keep eating Shion's food if he loses. Shion squeezes Rimuru, who's in her arms, while Gobta gets super motivated. Gobta defeats Gabiru with shadow movement in a few seconds, which surprises Rimuru. Gabiru falls to the ground unconscious, and Ranga declares him the winner. Rimuru's company in the scene changes their mindset about Gobta, while Rimuru wonders if Gobta is a kind of prodigy. Rimuru thinks about a lot of things, and later tells Gobta that he did well. He tells Gobta that he'll have Kurobi make a weapon for him, which makes Gobta celebrate, while the other lizardmen all stand still in shock. Rimuru tells the other lizardmen that they're willing to work with them, but they won't serve them. He tells the lizardmen to take Gabiru and leave for the day. They pick Gabiru up and hurriedly leave the scene, claiming that they'll be back. Rimuru discusses with his people about what they're going to do next. Sui reports about the orcs he saw and all the other information that he could put together. Rimuru and the others in the room discuss what the orcs are after and the probable people backing them. Rimuru suggests that it might be a demon lord as he talks about the probability of Gelmud being involved. Rimuru thinks about how the demon lord working with the orcs may not be the one who made Shizu suffer. Benimaru says that he doesn't think that a demon lord is working with the orcs, and that it increases the probability that there's an orc lord. Some other people say their own opinion until Sui makes a weird gesture. Sui reports that one of his body doubles, scouting the area, has made contact with some people who requested an audience with his leader. Rimuru says that he doesn't want to meet any weird person again, but Sui replies that the person is a dryad. Rimuru gets surprised as he thinks about his perverted thoughts of dryads. Rigurd talks about the last time they heard of dryads, and Rimuru tells Sui to let the dryad in. A light suddenly appears in the room as the dryad appears in front of Rimuru. She apologizes for her unannounced visit and introduces herself as trainee to them. Rimuru introduces himself to her and asks what brings her to his place. Trainee requests that she wants Rimuru to defeat the Orc Lord. Rimuru asks about what she just requested, which she reaffirms. Benimaru stands in front of Rimuru and says that her request is quite a selfish one for someone who just appeared out of nowhere. Benimaru calls her name and asks her why she came to Goblin Village when there are far stronger races. Trainee says that she would have gone to the Ogre Village if they were at full strength, as she continues to give her reasons. She finishes by saying that Rimuru is a powerful individual that she couldn't ignore. Rimuru replies that the existence of an Orc Lord was just a theory to them. Trainee picks up a piece of snack on the table and affirms that the Orc Lord does exist while eating the snack. Kaijin and Rigurd look at each other and say that it's true if a dryad acknowledges it. Rimuru tells Trainee to give him some time to answer her. He says that he'll back up the Kijins, but he needs some more information and gives some other reasons. Trainee sits at the table sipping her tea while Rimuru asks if anyone has an idea of what the orcs are after. Shuna replies that one thing comes to mind. She asks Sui if he investigated their village, which he affirms. Shuna concludes from his reaction that he didn't find any clue there, which Sui affirms. Rimuru asks about what they're talking about, and Sui replies that it's about the corpses. Benimaru tells him that it's how the 200,000 orcs feed. Trainee says that it's a unique skill named Starved that the Orc Lord uses. She explains the skill to them and how they use it for their sustenance. Trainee compares the skill to Rimuru's Predator skill, as she continues to talk about the orcs and how their only purpose is to eat, which is what their lord wants them to do. Rimuru stretches his body and says that they're not in the clear because they have races that the orcs will want to eat to gain their powers, while he discusses it with Benimaru for a while. Trainee tells them that they've confirmed that a certain Majin is behind the appearance of the orc lord, and it is someone they won't want to overlook. Rimuru thinks about the Majin, which Trainee explains that it's a subordinate of the Demon Lord. Rimuru thinks about how the Dryads know everything that happens in the forest. Trainee stands and stretches out her hand to request again that Rimuru should defeat the Orc Lord. She lists all his achievements including the Veldora issue while Rimuru looks at her surprised. He immediately asks Great Sage if he can trust her. Great Sage tells him everything about Dryads, but he thinks about how there are 200,000 orcs. Shion hugs Rimuru and says that he'll do it, and that the Orc Lord is no match for him. Rimuru transforms into his slime form and says that he'll accept the request to beat the Demon Lord, and he asks if they're all with him. Everyone stands one by one to proclaim that they're with him. Rimuru thinks of how he acted cool, and how he's about to lose his mind because of it. Ranga, who's patrolling, sees Gobta and some other young goblins sleeping by the window of the house, where Rimuru and the others are meeting. Rimuru tells them that they'll have to ally with other races like the lizard men to take on 200,000 orcs, but he doesn't want to talk to their representative, who doesn't listen. Sue stands and says that he'll meet with the Lizardman chieftain himself to discuss the alliance, which Rimuru allows after some questions. Gabiru opens his eyes to see the night sky. He hurriedly sits up wondering where he is, but gets hugged by one of his minions who's crying. Rimuru looks around to see the others and immediately remembers what happened. He tells them that they were tricked, claiming that the boy who defeated him is the real master of the village. The lizardmen gather to discuss how cowardly the hobgoblins are. Gabiru tells them not to worry, and that it's the wisdom of the weak that makes his subordinates applaud him. Gabiru notices a clown applauding among them, and he immediately asks for his identity. The clown introduces himself as Laplace, a servant of Lord Gelmud who has come to give them a warning. Gabiru welcomes him as he hears that he's from Gelmud. He asks Laplace for the advice, and Laplace tells them about the existence of an orc lord, and says that the lizard man chieftain is a capable man, but he's up in years. Gabiru replies that he intends to take over as chief when they fend off the orcs, but continues to say that it'll be too late then. He gets on his lizard and apologizes to Laplace for abruptly leaving him. Laplace tells him to go do what he has to do as Gabiru and his minions set out hurriedly. Laplace waves at them and tells Gabiru to do his best, while the orc army continues to march forward as they keep on chanting "Trample All." At the Lizardman chieftain's court, his daughter asks him what they're going to do because the orc army is approaching. He replies that they'll just remain there because they don't have a way to defeat an army of 200,000 orcs. One of the guards rushes in to inform the chieftain that they have an intruder who demands an audience with him. The chieftain tells the guard to bring him in while his daughter tries to convince him that it's dangerous because of the aura of the person. Sue walks in as the chieftain apologizes that they have a lot on their hands and he cannot spare any hospitality. Sue tells him not to trouble himself, stating that he's only a messenger that's there to convey the words of his master to them. The chieftain looks at his daughter and she and the other guards immediately stand at ease. The chieftain asks what the message is, and Sue tells them about the alliance. The chieftain says that he doesn't know about the master he speaks of, which makes Sue tell them the name of his master, Rimuru Tempest. He tells them about how he received a request from a dryad, and how he swore to defeat the approaching orc army. The chieftain and the other lizardmen in the court are surprised by his words as he continues to tell them about the information the dryad gave to them. One of the guards says that he hasn't heard of Rimuru before, and he tries to coerce the chieftain not to believe Sue's words. The chieftain tells him to hold his tongue as they suddenly see a thread around his neck that's making cut marks around it. The chieftain apologizes on behalf of the guard, and Sue tells them that he wouldn't allow anyone to insult his master while releasing the guard. The chieftain thinks about Sue's strong words and how he would have killed the guard if he didn't apologize on his behalf. The chieftain stands and says that he'll accept the alliance on a condition, which is that Sue should let him see the master he speaks of. Sue tells them to make preparations and that he'll have an audience with his master there in 7 days. Sue tells the chieftain not to wage war until their arrival, to which the chieftain replies that he understands. Sue walks away and disappears from the scene. The chieftain falls on his throne and says that he feels like he has seen a light of hope. He orders his daughter to summon everyone, The chieftain addresses his people about the situation and tells them that powerful reinforcement will be coming in 7 days. He tells them that they'll remain there and conserve their strength for battle. He tells them not to strike the enemies first and says that the orcs will eat up everyone they kill. He says that he won't tolerate any of them dying and rallies them up. 4 days later, 3 guards at the entrance of the lizardman cave take down an orc. They wonder if they just fought an orc because it had the strength of an ogre. Gabiru comes from behind to say that they'll be exhausted if all they do is defend. Gabiru goes to his father's court and his father welcomes him back. The chieftain asks about his mission, and Gabiru replies that they've recruited 7,000 goblins. He asks his father why they must remain there in the face of an orc attack, and claims that it's not a proud way for the lizardmen to fight. His father tells him about the offer alliance he received when Gabiru was away, and asks why they have to stay on defense. Gabiru looks at his father and tells him that he has aged as he stands from his kneeling posture. He talks about the strategy that his father is using and says it's disadvantages and gestures for his minions to come in and arrest his father. He tells them that he'll free them when he defeats the orc lord, as he orders them to take his sister, his father, and the vassal into detention. His father and sister try to stop him by calling to him, but he looks away from them and doesn't yield to their voices. After his minions take them away, one of his people brings the vortex spear of his father and hands it over to him. Rimuru lifts the spear and feels the powerful aura which makes him claim that the spear has accepted him. His other minions come into the court to give him reports of the young ones who didn't like the defensive idea. They kneel and say that they're behind him, stating that they're counting on him. Gabiru affirms and says that he'll show them how a true lizardman fights, which rallies them up as they begin to hail him. The narrator talks about how the orcs fill the marshland as they continue to march while chanting some words. Rimuru instructs his soldiers to attack the orcs in particular areas so they can use their agility to win the battle. He orders them to retreat and turns to leave, but turns back as he hears a shout. He sees the orcs eating the dead ones, which surprises Gabiru. The narrator says that Gabiru didn't know about the terror of the orc lord, but the chieftain knows. The orcs say that the strength of their comrade and the prey they eat is now theirs. Rimuru narrates how they are going to the marshlands to sign a treaty with the lizardman chieftain and fight the orc army. He lists the names of the people accompanying him on the journey. He also talks about the instructions he gave to the other people he left at the village. Sue contacts Rimuru through thought transmission to report his findings to him. He tells Rimuru about the lizard man who's fighting a high-rank orc, and he asks for action to take. Rimuru says that they have to help the lizard man. He asks if Sue can take the orc, which Sue calls a simple task. Rimuru tells him to do it and that they'll join up with him soon, which Sue responds to positively. Rimuru orders the people accompanying him to assume battle formation and that they're going to assist Sue. They arrive at Sue's location to see that it's already over. Rimuru thinks of how Sue is skilled as he walks towards him. Sue holds a female lizard man in his hand, and he tells Rimuru that she's gravely injured. Rimuru pours a potion into her mouth, and she gets completely healed. The female lizardman sits up thinking about how her fatal injuries have disappeared. She asks Rimuru who he is, and he introduces himself to her. The female lizard man immediately kneels in front of Rimuru and begs him to save her father, the lizard men chieftain, and her brother Gabiru. Rimuru asks if she's Gabiru's sister and what happened. She affirms that she's Gabiru's sister, and she proceeds to tell Rimuru about what her brother did at their village. She continues to say that he intends to repel the orcs' army on his own. She says that the lizardmen will be exterminated if action is not taken. She tells Rimuru about how she escaped with the help of her father and begs him for help even though they broke their promise to wait for him. Shion taps her back and says that it's okay because she recognizes Lord Rimuru's greatness. She tells the female lizard man that she has potential and helps her up from her knees. Shion tells her that she's certain that the lizard men will be saved, which makes the female lizardman thank her. Rimuru thinks about how Shion is taking more work on him and affirms that she is a secretary. Rimuru asks if she's the daughter of the lizardman chieftain, which she kneels to affirm. Rimuru acknowledges her as the representative of the lizardman chieftain, and he asks if she objects to the formation of their alliance, which she replies to. Rimuru replies that the alliance is formed, which makes the female lizardman thank him. Rimuru asks Sue if he can save the lizardman chieftain with his shadow movement, which he affirms. Rimuru tells Sue to go save the chieftain, while the rest of them continue to march on. At the marshland, the lizardmen battle with the orc army. Gabiru, who's watching the battle, orders his people to retreat while thinking of his previous intention, and how they don't have to, because they can defeat the orcs alone. Gabiru turns to leave the scene but hears a scream which makes him look back. He sees the orcs eating the dead orcs, which surprises him and makes the other lizardmen retreat to fret. The orcs grab one of the lizardmen and they consume him while he shouts for help. Gabiru immediately orders them all to retreat, but they soon realize that they're surrounded. Gabiru looks at the orcs and discovers that their movement has changed. He sees the scales on their body, and he concludes that the orcs are gaining the power of people they eat. One of the orcs tries to strike Gabiru, but he blocks it with the trident in his hand and pushes it away. He immediately orders all his men to maintain close formation, and he instructs them on what to do. Gabiru begins to think of how he and his people could have escaped if the goblins weren't there. He looks at the orcs that are approaching him while chanting their motto. Gabiru rallies his people to prepare them for the battle. He suddenly sees an orc with an intimidating aura, which he comments about. Gabiru asks if he's the orc's lord before introducing himself. He asks for a one-on-one duel, but the orc replies that he's an orc general and that he is nowhere close to the orc lord. Gabiru thinks about how the intimidating orc is still inferior to the orc lord. The orc general accepts the duel, and Gabiru thanks him while thinking about what the orc lord will be like. In the woods, a Majin that's behaving like a clown asks Gelmud if it is going fine. Gelmud affirms that it's going according to plan as he watches Gabiru and the orc general on the globe in his hand. Gelmud claims that his child will soon gain dominion over the forest. Trainee appears at their location and interrupts them. She says that it seems that they're having fun, and she introduces herself to them. The clown says that it's bad as he tells Gelmud about the dryads who are caretakers of forests. Trainee tells them that she'll be removing them from the forest because of the disruptions they've caused, which shocks Gelmud. Trainee summons a spirit named Sylphide and releases a powerful attack at them. The attack cuts off one of the clown's arms, which worries Gelmud. The clown tells Trainee that they've achieved their goal and that they'll be getting out of there. He drops some smoke bombs for them to escape, which makes Trainee say that it's not a desired outcome. She looks up hoping that Rimuru Tempest will defeat the Orc Lord before disappearing from the scene. Gabiru and the Orc General fight, and Gabiru gets pushed back in the fight. They exchange blows and skills, but the Orc General still overpowers Gabiru. Some of the lizardmen try to help Gabiru, but he stops them saying that it's a one-on-one fight. His words touch the lizardmen, and they start to chant his name. Gabiru tries his best to get close to the Orc General while dodging all his attacks. He strikes with all his might, but it gets blocked, and he is knocked away by the Orc General. The Orc General walks to where Gabiru's kneeling. He talks down to the lizardman and tries to finish him off, but his attack gets blocked by Gobta, who arrives at the scene. Gabiru says that Gobta is the true leader of the village, which makes Gobta wonder what he's talking about. Gabiru asks if he has come to save them as Ranga comes to his side. Ranga introduces Gobta and himself to Gabiru, who asks them how they got there. The Orc General tries to say that he'll take on anyone who tries to stop them. He's interrupted by an explosion that happens in between the horde of orcs. The black flames erase the orcs as more explosions continue to happen. The Orc General thinks about killing the person using great magic. Gabiru gets worried about the flames, which makes Gobta tell him that the users are on their side. Benimaru, Shion, and Hakaru talk to the orcs and remind them about how they were victims of their onslaught. The orcs are their horns and immediately recognize that they're ogres. Benimaru tells them to move out of the way if they don't want to be wiped out without a trace. He throws a black fireball at them, which they all dodge but still explodes at their center. Rimuru arrives at the scene flying in the sky with wings. He compliments Benimaru's black flames as he looks to Gobta's side. The Orc General walks down on Ranga and Gobta, who have come to assist the lizards. This pisses Ranga off and he immediately steps forward. He releases his aura and immediately summons black clouds with black lightning in the sky and some black tornado. Rimuru, who's flying, wonders what's going on, which Great Sage tells him about. The tornado carries the orcs and the Orc General away. Black lightning strikes them and erases them. Ranga evolved into a Tempest Star Wolf, which Gobta happily tells him about. Ranga asks the orcs if they can see a fraction of the power they're talking down on, while Gobta says that they've all been blown away. Benimaru and the other Kijins continue to destroy the orcs as Rimuru watches from the sky and hopes that they remain friends even after the war. Rimuru thinks about how things are going on Sue's end. The female lizardman opens her mouth shocked as she sees Sue take down all the orcs at the scene. Sue gives her a potion to use on her injured people. They open the prison where her father and his vassal are. The female lizardman runs to go hug her father, who's surprised to see Sue too. The female lizardman helps her father walk while he asks Sue why he came to help them. Sue tells him that the alliance has been formed while his daughter further explains what happened to him. They get interrupted by a giant orc, Geld, who tries to attack them. The lizardman chieftain tries to warn Sue, but soon realizes that he's fine because Geld has been tied down by some threads. The lizardman chieftain thinks about how he's happy that he accepted the alliance. Soe tells Geld that he'll make attacking the ogres and making enemies with the Kijins his greatest regret. He taps one of the threads, and the other threads on Geld's body immediately cut him into pieces. The Lizardman chieftain and his vassal are shocked about what they just witnessed. Gelmud, who's watching the scene on his globe, angrily smashes the globe on the ground. He thinks about the Kijins and the large wolf that destroyed his plans, and he gets worried about the things happening outside his notice. He immediately flies into the sky as he worries about being killed by a certain man. In a castle, a man looks at the moon with a smile on his face and a glass of wine in his hand. At the battlefield, Rimuru looks around and notices the Orc Lord. He informs Ranga that he has seen the Orc Lord. The Orc Lord says that it is hungry and it'll eat anything as its eyes begin to glow. Rimuru puts on his mask and declares that he'll put an end to the Orc Lord. Rimuru notices that something is approaching them. He looks back and dodges Gelmud, who flies past him. Gelmud lands at the scene, and his impact with the ground creates a light shockwave. Rimuru looks at Gelmud and wonders if he's a Majin. Gelmud asks the Kijins what the big idea is and why they ruin his plans. Rimuru thinks about his name, which he talks about before the great sage can give him the information. Gelmud begins to rant about how a demon lord who would have done his bidding was about to be born. Rimuru and Benimaru think about the demon lord, which makes Gelmud continue his ranting as he claims that it's the reason why he gave out many names. He continues to say that he wanted to create the ultimate pawn. The Kijins get angry as they realize that their village was destroyed because of his stupid ambition. Gabiru calls Gelmud and asks him why he's there. He asks if Gelmud came to save them, but he receives a rather shocking reply. Gelmud tells Gabiru to allow the Orc Lord to eat him so he can be useful in his death, which leaves Gabiru speechless. Gelmud turns to the Orc Lord and orders him to get them, but he doesn't react. Gelmud asks him what is wrong, and the Orc Lord questions him about the evolving Demon Lord question. Gelmud calls him an imbecile and says that it's his wish and that man's wish for him to rule the great forest as he becomes the orc disaster. The angry and impatient Gelmud thinks about how he shouldn't be involved actively, but still attacks Gabiru with an attack. 3 of Gabiru's minions stand in front of him to protect him from the attack. The 3 of them get knocked unconscious with injuries. Gabiru begins to cry as he screams Gelmud's name, but Gelmud prepares another attack. He tells Gabiru to become nourishment to the Orc Lord, and he attacks him with his Death March skill. Rimuru swallows all the attacks and talks down on it. He gives Gabiru some potions to use on his injured people. Rimuru uses the Spider Thread skill to tie Gelmud down, and he begins to punch him. Rimuru tells him that he's not the big shot he claims to be, and he tries to get some information from him while still punching him. Gelmud, who just keeps ranting, tries to rouse the Orc Lord to help him by calling the name he gave it when it was dying in the desert. The Orc Lord, Geld, remembers the words of Gelmud and immediately starts to move. Gelmud continues to rant about the Orc Lord's strength and tells Rimuru's people to prepare while laughing. Geld cuts off Gelmud's head from behind, which surprises the others, and Geld devours Gelmud's body. Great Sage tells Rimuru about how Gelmud's life signals have ceased, and how the Orc Lord's magicules have vastly increased. Great Sage says that the Orc Lord has now evolved into a demon lord called the Orc Disaster. Rimuru states that he can't sit around and do nothing anymore, while Geld screams out claiming that he's the Orc Disaster. He declares that he's the Demon Lord, and the one that'll devour all in the world. Rimuru decides to kill him before he becomes a disaster, but the Kijins immediately start to act. Benimaru tells Rimuru to leave Geld to them. Shion attacks Geld with her large sword continually, but she gets pushed back by his strength. Hakaru swiftly cuts off Geld's head in the fight, but they soon realize that the head is reattached to his body. Sue traps Geld in a spider thread cocoon as Benimaru and Ranga blow up the cocoon with their black flames and black lightning skills. Rimuru asks Ranga to hide in his shadow since he's out of magicules. They suddenly see Geld standing with some injuries. One of the orcs offers his body to Geld, who immediately devours him to completely heal himself. Geld shoots Gelmud's Death March skill at them, which Rimuru swallows as he steps up to take Geld on by himself. He allows Great Sage, who switches to battle mode, to control his body and defeat the enemy. Rimuru starts to evade Geld's attack and counters with his attacks that damage Geld. They fight for a while, and Geld successfully grabs a hold of Rimuru. He intends to devour him, but the Great Sage activates Ifrit's Pillar of Fire ability, which engulfs them both. Geld screams in pain in the fire, but laughs after the fire goes out, which makes Rimuru realize that fire doesn't work on Geld. Rimuru tells his partner Great Sage that he'll take over as he thanks Great Sage for helping him find a way to defeat Geld. Rimuru tells Geld that he has acknowledged him as his enemy, and that he'll take him on for real. Geld laughs and says that he can't do anything. Rimuru tells him that he'd devour him while declaring that he's a slime. Rimuru transforms into his slime form as his body begins to spread around on Geld's body, as he intends to devour him. Everyone at the scene watches the battle of devourers in awe as Rimuru completely covers Geld's body. Rimuru begins to watch scenes from Geld's past. He sees how Geld sacrificed his arm for children to eat, and how he decided to go find food for his people in the forest alone. Rimuru sees how Geld met Gelmud, and how he got named. The present Geld tells Rimuru about how he was deceived by Gelmud and used as a pawn in his evil scheme, but he says that he had to take the risk. Geld tells Rimuru about how he has eaten every race he came across, even his brethren. He tells Rimuru that he can't get eaten yet because his sins would be transferred to his brethren who are watching the battle of devourers. Rimuru tells him that he'd devour him, and his sins which makes Geld tell him that he's greedy. Rimuru affirms that he's greedy as the desert area in Geld's mind transforms into a forest filled with plants and trees. Geld falls to his knee crying, and he thanks the greedy one who devoured his sins. He tells Rimuru that his hunger has been sated as he disappears. On the outside, Great Sage confirms that the orc disaster is gone, and Rimuru transforms back to his human form. Rimuru narrates how the advancement of the orcs halted because the effect of starved on them was no more. The people on his side hail him as he declares that the war is over. Rimuru tells the Kijins that he'd set them free just as he had promised, but Benimaru asks for a favor. He asks that Rimuru accept their pledge of allegiance, and they'll continue to serve him. Rimuru asks if he's sure, and all the Kijins affirm it. Shion hugs him and claims that she's the secretary and bodyguard of the great Rimuru. The day after the defeat of Demon Lord Geld, representatives of each race gathered together to discuss what would happen after the battle. Trainee calls Rimuru the chairman and tells him to begin the conference. Rimuru says that he has never led a meeting like that, so it's not his strong suit. He continues to say that he'll say what is on his mind, and that he'd like them to save their deliberations until after that. Rimuru says that he doesn't intend to charge the orcs with any crimes. He asks the lizardmen who probably suffered the most casualties to listen to him. He talks about what caused the incident, which is starvation, and says that it could have happened to any race, which he says might just be a public stance. The lizardmen chieftain asks for Rimuru's thoughts, and Rimuru says that has taken all the orcs' sins on himself. He tells anyone with complaints to bring it to him. But one of the orcs tries to say that there's no logic to it, but Rimuru interrupts him, saying that it was a promise he made to Geld. The chieftain says that he feels Rimuru's answer is somewhat unfair. Benimaru walks into the center and talks about the survival of the fittest rule that they share when two parties enter into battle. Rimuru asks Benimaru if he doesn't have any complaints because his home was destroyed, and Benimaru replies to him, which the other Kijins affirm. The chieftain says it's a fair point, and asks Rimuru if he intends to take care of the orcs. Rimuru replies with the suggestion of making an alliance where everyone helps each other while building up a mutually cooperative relationship. Rimuru says that it'll be fine if they make it into a nation for all the races. One of the orcs asks if there's a place for them in the alliance too, to which Rimuru replies. All the orcs in the room kneel and bow as they declare that they'll devote their lives to the work they're given. Rimuru nods and looks at the lizardmen chieftain, who also nods to affirm that they'll also be participating in the alliance. Rimuru asks Trainee if it's okay, to which she replies positively. Trainee stands and pledges to acknowledge Rimuru as the new chancellor of the Great Forest of Jura. She declares that the Jura Forest Alliance is to be established under him as she kneels in front of him, and the others in the room also kneel. Rimuru wonders why he's the chancellor and not Trainee. He thinks about how declining isn't an option, and he decides to accept it. Rimuru says that it's how it's going to be, and that he's counting on them, which they all reply to positively. After the meeting, Geld's son calls the Kijins to apologize for what the orcs did to his village. He falls to his knees and asks that they take his head and forgive the other orcs. Benimaru tells him about how they told the great Rimuru that they want to continue serving him and the new positions they've received. Benimaru tells him the position they all have and says that he's in charge of military affairs. He continues to say that he wouldn't want to lose a capable warrior since he's in that position. He tells Geld's son that he'll show no mercy to anyone who wrongs Rimuru, and Geld's son says that he wouldn't dream of wronging Rimuru, claiming that he saved them all. Benimaru tells him that they're servants of the same master and that he should do his best to be useful to their master. Benimaru and the others walk away, saying that they'll accept his apology if the orcs join the alliance and revere Rimuru. Geld's son bows his head as they walk away while Rimuru talks about how gracious Benimaru is. Rimuru grants Geld's son his father's name, and tells him to lead the orcs well. The new orc leader evolves into an orc king, as Rimuru spends the next 10 days naming the other 150,000 orcs. He also gives the lizardman chieftain the name Abiru. Gabiru gets charged with the crime of treason and thinks about his penalty. Gabiru concludes that he'll get the death penalty, which he considers to be a good way to set an example. He expresses his regret of not being able to ask Rimuru why he saved a worthless fool like him. His father, Abiru, tells him to raise his head and declares that he will state the verdict. Gabiru thinks about the death penalty he'd receive, but Abiru declares that he'll be excommunicated and exiled, which surprises Gabiru. Abiru orders the guards to cast him out immediately, which they did. They push Gabiru, and one of the guards gives him the vortex spear and a wrapped cloth. Gabiru begins to cry on seeing the vortex spear. Gabiru begins his journey, and he's met by 3 of his closest minions, who say that they'll go with him. Their words move Gabiru to tears, and he declares that he'll take care of them if they follow him. At a castle, a man looks outside the window while Lapis says that he must be angry that the new demon lord wasn't born after all his plans. The man replies and says that he saw something more interesting as he wonders what he'd do with the slime. Laplace tells him good luck and says that he'll lend a hand for cheap while referring to the man as Demon Lord Clayman. Laplace disappears from the castle while Clayman laughs. 3 months after the defeat of the Orc Lord, the High Orcs which evolved from the Orcs were learning new skills under Kaijin's instructions. Rimuru watches the development in the village and the new facilities and structures that they're developing. He tells Ranga that they all have to work harder together to make the village a greater place, which Ranga affirms. Rimuru thinks about the peace they're about to achieve, but is soon disappointed by Sue's report. Sue tells Rimuru about the several hundred Pegasus flying knights that are heading their way, which surprises Rimuru. King Gazelle, who's leading the knights, remembers the meeting he had with his officials, where he read a report, and they discuss the probability of the Magians working for the slime. King Gazelle thinks of slime as the one who controls superior Magian and the one who causes the evolution of monsters. He thinks of how his nation may fall if the matter isn't handled with care. He declares to his officials that he'll see just what the slime is like with his eyes. Rimuru and his officials run to the entrance of the village to see the knights. Rimuru says that it's the hero king of Dwargon, which makes Benimaru ask him what they should do. Rimuru says that he'd like to avoid fighting if possible and instructs them on what to do if they can't avoid it. The hero king and his knights land in front of the village, and Kaijin immediately goes to kneel before the king. He greets King Gazelle and he replies to him. Rimuru hops over and King Gazelle calls him Slime. Rimuru introduces himself to King Gazelle and tells him that he'd rather not have people call him Slime as he transforms into his human form. He says that it's not his true form, but it's easier to talk that way. King Gazelle tells Rimuru that he has come to see what he's like as he holds his sword, and says some rude words to Rimuru while demanding a duel. The knights get worried, but King Gazelle tells them that an earnest battle is the best way to solve it, while Rimuru accepts the duel as they both take out their swords. King Gazelle tells Rimuru that he wins if he takes on his entire chain of attacks. He tells Rimuru not to underestimate his sword skill, which Rimuru accepts. Trainee appears at the scene and declares that she'll serve as a witness to the contest. King Gazelle and the knights are surprised by the Dryad, but King Gazelle insists that they continue the duel. Trainee commences the fight and they start to exchange blows. After fighting for a while, King Gazelle uses his sword skill, but Rimuru, who knows about the skill, blocks it. King Gazelle says that he stopped his attack, and Trainee declares that Rimuru is the winner. King Gazelle says that the duel has made him know that Rimuru isn't a bad person, which Rimuru's people all nod to affirm. He talks about how Rimuru blocked his skill, which Rimuru says that it's a coincidence because his master uses the skill in training. King Gazelle is surprised and tries to ask about the master as Hakuro walks into the scene to compliment Rimuru. King Gazelle calls Hakuro the savant, and he casually replies before changing into the official setting with an apology while they talk about the past. Rimuru concludes that Hakuro was King Gazelle's master when he was younger. At nighttime, Rimuru's people drink together while Rimuru discusses with King Gazelle. King Gazelle tells Rimuru about the reasons why he came and why he tested him, to which Rimuru replies that he understands. King Gazelle asks if Rimuru is interested in entering a treaty with him, which surprises Rimuru. King Gazelle continues to say that Rimuru could obtain wealth and power that surpasses that of his nation if he were to take control of everything in the vast forest. King Gazelle says the merits of their alliance and what they both stand to gain while answering all of Rimuru's doubts. Rimuru accepts his proposal, and King Gazelle asks for the name of his country. Rimuru thinks about it for a while and decides to use the Jura Tempest Federation. Rimuru's people in the room accept the name with joy, and Rigurd says that their town will be the capital, which will be named Rimuru. They all accept it, while Rimuru tries to talk them out of it. King Gazelle says that it is settled as he stands from where he's sitting to shake hands with Rimuru, while the others applaud them. The narrator says that the names Jura Tempest Federation and the capital city, Rimuru, were first engraved in history for the first time on that day. 2 days later, King Gazelle comes back and Rimuru asks what he wants. He says that he wants to give Rimuru a gift, and he gestures to his knights, who immediately throw down a wrapped person. Rimuru and Kaijin get surprised as they see Vesta, whose eyes are rolling on the floor. King Gazelle tells them his reason for bringing Vesta over and tells Rimuru to use him as he wishes. Kaijin tries to tell the king that Vesta's knowledge would leave the dwarves, but the king counters him and says that it's what the alliance is for. King Gazelle orders Vesta to help improve the land there and devote himself to studying there. Vesta replies that he'll live up to the king's expectations this time. He turns to Kaijin and Rimuru to apologize and asks them to allow him to work there. Kaijin says that having one more talented researcher around will be a big help, and he tells Rimuru that he'll take responsibility if anything bad happens. He begs Rimuru to put faith in him and show Vesta mercy. Vesta looks at Kaijin in tears, while Rimuru welcomes him aboard, since Kaijin is okay with it. Vesta thanks Rimuru and says that he'll give his utmost effort for him. King Gazelle says farewell and leaves with his Pegasus riding knights as Rimuru's people applaud. Rimuru notices Gabiru and his friends clapping and asks what he's doing there. Gabiru says that he arrived with the hope that he may be of some help to Rimuru, while his 3 friends hype him. Hyon threatens to cut him up, and he immediately says that he hoped Rimuru would permit them to join his ranks, and they all kneel to him, begging that they'll be useful to him. Gabiru's sister also kneels before Rimuru and begs him to accept them, as she says that she has not been disowned, unlike her brother. Gabiru asks her if she didn't follow him because she missed him, and she replies that she was sent there to gain experience, which shocks Gabiru as he starts to rant. Rimuru names Gabiru's sister and her servants. Rimuru sees Gabiru, who's looking jealous, and he tells him not to be, and says that he has already been named Gabiru. Rimuru immediately feels that he used up some magicals as Gabiru begins to shine, and he realizes that names can be overwritten. Rimuru later names the other lizardmen who evolve into dragonutes. He hands over Gabiru's sister, Soka, and her servants, who have acquired human forms to Sue, to manage, while he sends Gabiru and his boys to cultivate valuable hippocute herbs in Veldora's cave, stating how the place is a good habitation for them. Rimuru checked on Gabiru and asked about the cultivation. Gabiru boasts about his efforts and shows the plant to Rimuru. Rimuru immediately hits him in the face and tells him that it's a weed, which Gabiru apologizes about. Rimuru thinks about the research room they set up for Vesta in the cave, and how he's working to create healing potions from hippocute herbs. Rimuru thinks of how great it'll be if he can do mass production of the ones he made already. He hops outside the cave, thinking of everything that has happened. At the Demon Lord's castle, the Demon Lords watch the scene where Rimuru devours the orc disaster. A girl named Milim says that it's interesting, and that she'll undertake the investigation of the toy herself. Clayman tells her that they have a non-aggression pact with the Forest of Jura. She replies that they can abolish the pact because Veldora is gone, which Clayman and the other 2 people in the room accept. Milim tells them not to interfere with her investigation, which Clayman accepts while she flies out through the window. Rimuru immediately senses the magic and wonders what it is. He realizes that it's heading their way at an incredible speed, and he hops to the potential landing area in his slime form. Milim lands with a massive shockwave, and she introduces herself to him. She says that she heard he was the strongest in the area, and she came to introduce herself. They discuss for a while as she tells him about her Milim Eyes ability, which Rimuru compares to his appraisal skill. She asks about the human form he used to defeat Gelmud, and he transforms into it, saying that she already knows everything. Milim inspects his body and asks if he defeated the Orc Lord. Rimuru replies that he did win, and then asks about the business she came for. He asks if she has come to avenge Gelmud, but Milim replies that she came to introduce herself. Rimuru wonders if that's all she came for, only to get picked up by Ranga, while Shion attacks Milim with her large sword. Milim easily holds the sword and asks if she wants to play, while Rimuru tries to tell Ranga who's running away to stop. Milim knocks Shion away by just pushing her, but Milim immediately gets wrapped by Sue's threads. Benimaru throws his black flames at her, and it explodes while he hopes that it singes her. Milim laughs as she comes out of the black flames. She compliments the attack and claims that it may work on other demon lords, but it won't work on her. She releases a large attack that causes a tornado that blows everything around her away, while creating a crater larger than the one she made when she landed. Rimuru checks on Shion and uses a healing potion on her. Benimaru tries to tell him to get away so that they can protect him, but he throws a potion at him and Sue and tells them to stand down. Rimuru tells them that he'll take care of it as he walks toward Malim, who asks if he's going to face her. Rimuru talks about her confidence and asks her to taste one of his attacks, which she laughs while accepting. She tells him that he must swear to become her subordinate if it doesn't work, which he accepts. Great Sage informs Rimuru that her magicules exceed his by more than 10 times, which he thinks about. Rimuru decides what he'll do, and he begins to summon some golden matter to his hand. He runs towards her and slaps it into her mouth while the others watch. Milim gets excited as she says that she has never had something that delicious. Rimuru calls Milim, who's licking her mouth, and tells her to admit defeat and that he would give her some more. He takes out more of the golden liquid while remembering how he found the honey in the forest. Milim says that she wants it while behaving like a child, but says to herself that she can't admit defeat. Rimuru throws the honey into his mouth and says that it's tasty. He says that he's getting low on the honey, which makes Milim propose a draw and swear never to mess with any of them ever again. Rimuru makes a sinister smile and thinks about how he has won. He hands her a jar of honey while accepting her proposal. Milim smiles with a flustered face and jumps for joy with the jar in her hands. Mirim licks the honey beside Rimuru, who's wondering why she hasn't left yet. She asks him about becoming a demon lord, which they discuss before Rimuru replies that he's not interested. They discuss what they do for fun, and Milim later begs Rimuru to take her to his village. Rimuru reluctantly accepts and gives her conditions to allow her to come to the village, which she accepts. Rimuru's company thinks of how great he is to be taming a demon lord, and Sue disappears from the scene to tell Rigurd about it. Gabiru enters the scene and asks who the little runt is, only to get punched in the face. Milim walks to where he landed and confronts him for calling her a little runt. She says that she'll let him go because she's in a good mood, while Gabiru sits up to say what he saw when he got hit. He tries to ask who the little runt is, but changes it to the young lady to avoid getting hit. Rimuru introduces her to him, which shocks him because she's a demon lord. Rimuru confronts Malim about slugging people when she gets mad, and she tries to explain herself to him, which Rimuru counters. He tells her not to do more of it, which makes her pout. Rimuru introduces Milim to everyone as a new ally. He tells them to treat her as a guest, and to be courteous with her. Milim tells the people her name, and they immediately know that she's a demon lord, while Gobta and Rigurd hail their master for befriending a tyrant like her. Rimuru wonders if Milim is famous and thinks about why everyone is okay with it. Milim declares that she'll be staying in their village from that day on, which makes the people celebrate, while Rimuru is shocked by her statement. Rimuru tries to confirm what she said, and she reaffirms it. Milim, who's flustered, says that she's been hearing people say that she and Rimuru are friends. She lifts him and says that they are besties, which Rimuru reluctantly accepts, and the people celebrate. At nighttime, Milim takes a dip in the hot spring with Rimuru, who thinks about how he had the dwarf brothers make it for him. Milim swims around in the celebrated hot spring, while Shuna stops Shion from swimming too. Rimuru leaves the hot spring thinking about how he casually joined them. Rimuru sits in a room thinking of coffee milk, and he wonders if they can make milk in this world. Rigurd calls Rimuru's attention and says that it's about Lady Malim. Rimuru reminds them that she won't cause any trouble, but Kaijin says that the problem is the other demon lords. Kaijin says that there are several demon lords, and they all tell Rimuru about what the demon lords do. They talk about how powerful Milim is and wonder what will happen if the other demon lords come for them, while highlighting the merits and demerits of their alliance with her. Rigurd declares that they'll leave everything to the great Rimuru because he's besties with her, while Rimuru thinks about how they dumped everything on him. Rimuru thinks about how he has no choice, but the narrator says that they didn't know that the whirlwind Milim would stir up had just begun to blow. Milim continues to play in the hot spring only, and Shion later joins her while Shuna tries to tell them to stop. In the kingdom of Blumend, Baron Variard asks Guildmaster Fuse if it's true that there's a city of monsters that is home to a slime that bested the Orc Lord. Fuse doesn't reply, which makes Baron Variard conclude that he knew about it. Baron Variard says that he simply can't believe it, but he has to believe that the slime called Rimuru has saved them. Fuzi affirms it, and asks him what sort of relationship they should seek with them and some other routes they can take. Baron Variard asks if the eliminating route is even possible, but he later avoids Fuzi's honest reply. Fuse stands and suggests that they meet with him once, and says that he'll judge Rimuru with his own eyes. Outside the guild building, Fuse tells Kaval and his team that they're going to see the slime the three of them met. Milim eats in a room, and she compliments all the food in the village, while Shion and Shuna watch her. At Vesta's laboratory, Rimuru asks Gabiru if he's okay because of the punch he received from Milim. Gabiru replies that he's fine as he beats his chest only to feel pain while his minion hypes him up. Rimuru asks Vesta if the communication device he's making works, and he replies that it works, and he tells him about how he used it to contact King Gazel. He tells Rimuru the things he told King Gazel, and Rimuru says that it's good. Vesta shows Rimuru the product of his research on the potion he has been trying to make. He explains the percentage of Rimuru's potion using Gabiru to demonstrate and that of the dwarves, which is 1% below Rimuru's own. He explains how important the 1% difference is, and he shows Rimuru the new potion he has been able to achieve. Rimuru appraises the potion and tells Vesta that he has made a full potion, which he commends him for. Gabiru and Kaijin also commend Vesta's success. Rimuru begins to talk about the mass production and the sales of the full potion, but Kaijin suggests some things about the sales of quality potion to him, which Vesta also confirms. Vesta suggests doing business with King Gazel, and they discuss how it'll benefit both nations. Rimuru tells them to bring it up for negotiation. Rimuru and Kaijin come out of the cave to see a large explosion happen in the village from afar. Rimuru hurriedly flies to the village to check what's going on. He reaches the scene where people are gathered and Sui appears to tell him that a new guest has arrived in town. He tells Rimuru that Milim took an exception to the guest as Rimuru enters the crowd to see what is going on. He sees Rigurd with a bad injury on his face and he pours a potion on him. He sees someone unconscious on the floor and he asks if that's the person that injured Rigurd. Milim sees Rimuru and runs over to tell him that she taught the guy a lesson because he tried to mock them. She explains everything that happened to Rimuru while waiting for him to praise her. Rimuru thinks about how she'll get away with doing that to another demon lord's underling. Rimuru asks her about the rule he gave, which she tries to defend by saying that her victim is not from the town. Rimuru replies that it counts, which shocks her. He tells her that he'll let her off without lunch because she stands up for Rigurd. She begins to cry while screaming that he's cruel. Mirim runs over to the unconscious guy to continue hitting him and claiming that it's his fault. Rimuru stops her and gives her a sandwich to eat. Rimuru asks the guests why they came to his village. The leader of the guests asks Rimuru if he expects him to answer a lowly slime, which immediately pisses all of Rimuru's people in the room. Rimuru tells the guy that he's stronger than him even, and that his behavior might make his people Carrion's enemies. Rimuru asks him if he wants to be solely responsible for antagonizing the entire Great Forest of Jura. The leader of the guest replies that it's all big talk as he talks down on everyone serving under Rimuru and says that he's talking like that because Demon Lord Mirim took a liking to him. Mirim interrupts him from where she's eating, but Rimuru tells her not to talk while using her food to threaten her. Rimuru turns to the rude guests and says that he's a slime, but he rules 30% of their forest. He tells them that he'll have no choice but to declare war if they're really serious. Rimuru tells him to think carefully before he answers him. The leader of the guests tells him about what they came to do, which makes Rimuru realize that she wasn't the only demon lord that had an eye on his battle. Miriam thinks of how Carrion broke his promise as she begins to angrily release her aura, which they could all feel. Rimuru looks at her and she stops immediately with a straight face. Rimuru tells them that he understands and that they can leave. The Kijins ask him about it and he replies to them. He tells the guests to inform their demon lord to choose a date and contact them if he wants to talk. The Geasts leave and their leader says that he'll make them regret it. Rimuru transforms to his human form and asks Mirim all. She knows about Demon Lord Carrion. Mirim tells him that she can't because they've sworn not to, but Rimuru continues to coerce her. He promises to make a new weapon for her as her bestie, which she accepts with a wide smile on her face. Miriam tells him about the other demon lords, and how they all used Gelmud before their plan was destroyed by Rimuru and his people. Benimaru says that it's likely that other demon lords will become involved as well, which Rigurd refers to as a predicament. He suggests that they consult Trainee, but Shion tells them that it'll be alright because they have their master, Rimuru. Milim reminds Rimuru about the weapon he promised her. The narrator talks about how the storm that arose with Mirim's attack will gain strength along its path and consume Rimuru and his people. The narrator continues to talk about the kingdom of Falmouth, which is one of the nations that is surrounding the Great Forest of Jura, and how it's a major trade power known as the gateway to the western provinces. A team was sent to the Forest of Jura to learn about the Orc Lord from the kingdom of Falmouth. The narrator talks about the leader of the rowdy gang, named Yum. Yum notices something wrong, and he stops the advance of the gang. They start to feel tremors coming from somewhere ahead of them, and they all prepare to fight. They hear the voices of people in trouble, and Yum immediately uses his Farsight ability to check them out. he sees 4 people running from a night spider. Eren jumps out of the bush, followed by the rest of her company, and apologizes for getting Yume and his people involved. The night spider shows up, which surprises the gang. Yume orders them to get into formation, and he tells them to survive. Yume tells his assistant named Kajir to take command and orders the rest on what to do. He tells Fuzei and his company that he'll make them pay for getting them involved. The night spider approaches them, and they all get tensed. Gupta arrives at the scene riding on his Tempest Wolf partner with the rest of his team. He calls out Kaval and greets him. Gupta asks them if they love fighting because he always meets them fighting monsters. Gupta takes out his sword and attacks the night spider, declaring that it's for dinner. Gupta defeats the monster, which surprises Yume. Gupta tells them that the night spiders are seriously delicious. At Rimuru's town, the cooks prepare the monsters for eating, while the others wait with their plates in their hands. At the meeting room, Rimuru introduces himself to the guests, which surprises Fuz because he's a slime. Kaval asks about the new faces he's seeing, and Rimuru introduces the Kijins in the room to them. Milim enters the room and hurriedly goes to sit, and Rimuru introduces her to them too. Rimuru asks Yume and Fuzei if both their kingdoms have come to investigate his place. Fuzei tries to talk, but Yume asks why a slime is a big shot there, and he questions the people serving under him. Shion tries to caution him, but he shuts her up rudely, which makes her knock him out with her sheathed sword. Rimuru pours a healing potion on Yume. Milim comments about Shion's impatience and tells Shion to be like her. Rimuru continues to say that he wants to be on good terms with humans and talks about his trading goals. He tells them about the union between his country and Dwargon, which surprises the guests. Vesta enters the room and tells the guests that he can vouch for it. Fuzei, who immediately recognizes him, calls him a minister, but he replies that he's a former minister. Vesta tells them that King Gazelle and Rimuru have entered into a treaty that rendered Fuzei speechless. Yume looks to his assistants and nods to them, which they both understand. Fuzei says that he needs undeniable proof that he's an ally of humans. Rimuru says that he understands and allows them to stay in the village for a while to ascertain that they are not threats. Rimuru asks Fuzei about the spread of the Orc Lord news, and Fuzei immediately tells Rimuru that only the king and a selected handful of people know about it. Rimuru suggests to Yume that he wants them to make a contract with him, which Yume tries to question, but soon remembers that Shion is close by. Rimuru says that he wants them to be the champions who defeated the Orc Lord. Everyone is left speechless for a while, as Yume and his assistants get surprised. Rimuru explains how the story will be where it'll be, including that he is the trustworthy monster who assisted the champions. He tells them why he wants to do it that way, which makes his people understand his intention. Later in the evening, Yume looks at the sunset while thinking of the offer he was given. Rimuru comes to meet him to ask for his thoughts on the offer. He compliments the town and says that he knows Rimuru is not some evil being after seeing the people in his village. He tells Rimuru why they took the mission so they could frame their deaths and go away to some faraway land. Yume tells Rimuru that he has decided to trust him as he walks up to him. He kneels before Rimuru, asking that he allow him to call him Master Rimuru and that he'll be at his command. Rimuru accepts and Yume smiles. The narrator begins to talk about how Yume and his companions began to train under Hakuru to look like champions. At the Demon Lord's castle, Clayman talks to someone behind a curtain named Tyr. He tries to confirm that no one noticed her when she was coming. Tyr replies that she's part of the moderate Harlequin alliance and tells him to have little faith in her. Clayman laughs and tells her about why he's concerned. Tyr, who's in a clown's attire, enters the room from the closed window and tells Clayman to stop treating her as a child. Clayman tells her about the news about Milim that he received from Miulan. Tyr asks questions about it, which he replies to with his elegance, stating that it seems interesting. He tells her about Laplace's view of the Majin that Milim has taken a liking to, which Tyr claims will be true, because Laplace is a cunning guy. Tyr says that they need to find out why Milim is there, which Clayman affirms. He asks about the investigation she just finished, and she tells him everything up the info, that Frey was panicking that Charybdis will soon be revived. Clayman thinks about Charybdis and immediately tells Tyr that he has another mission for her. Tyr says that she expected it, and that she has already contacted Footman for any violence that'll happen, to which Clayman replies that there won't be much violence. He instructs her to first seek out the location of the seal, and to find out whether or not they can tame Charybdis. She tells Clayman to leave it to her while he is trying to give her some information, and she disappears from the scene. Clayman thinks about Charybdis's power, that's said to rival that of a demon lord, and he says that he truly looks forward to seeing what it's like, while he laughs. The leader of the Carrion underlings, Phobio, remembers how Milim punched him. He grits his teeth and says that she'll pay for it. One of them tries to tell Phobio that it is beyond their control even for their demon lord, Carrion. Phobio shuts him up and says that Lord Carrion won't have humiliated himself like him. They begin to talk about how they should have taken another route, which makes Phobio acknowledge that he handled it all wrong. He continues to talk about the things he should have done instead and says that it's too late. Phobio talks about the humiliation he faced and says that he has to get revenge somehow. He says that he wants revenge that won't affect Lord Carrion, while the other guy tries to tell him that it's not possible. As they continue their conversation, they get interrupted by a clown, who says that he understands the vexation that Phobio is feeling. The clown introduces himself to them as Footman the Angry Pierrot and a member of the moderate Harlequin Alliance. A female clown comes out from his back and tells them not to be so guarded. She introduces herself as Tear and tells them that they're not enemies. Phobio asks them what they want, and Footman tells them what brought him to them. He offers to help Phobio with whatever is making him angry, but another member of Phobio's team tries to disregard their words. He tells Footman that they're Beast King's Beastketeers that serve the demon lord Carrion. Footman tells them about the power he has to offer, and says that it comes with risks, and what they stand to gain if they overcome the risk. Phobio reacts to Footman's words, which makes Tyr say that he can become a demon lord too if he wants to defeat Milim. Phobio tries to tell them not to fool him, but Footman talks about the monster named Charybdis, which surprises them all. Footman and Tyr talk about it for a while and threaten to offer it to another person if he doesn't want it. Phobio stops them against his wish and that of his team, and he rants for a while about his whole situation. Footman and Tyr tell him more about the deal and what it entails. They use words to coerce Phobio into accepting their offer. Phobio thinks about the benefits of the offer and accepts it. He tells the 3 people accompanying him to go back. He instructs them to tell everything that happened and everything he said to Lord Carrion. The others reply to him positively, and they leave the scene. Phobio's assistant thinks to himself that Phobio will be able to subdue Charybdis because he's not a fool. Phobio watches his people leave, and the clown pair tell him that they're about to move. Phobio talks about combining his power with Charybdis and making a mess out of Milim's face. Footman motivates him while Tyr claims that she'll cheer him on. In Rimuru's city, in the hot spring, Shion, Shuna, and Milim compete for who can stay underwater the longest, while Rimuru, who's in the male's part of the hot spring, thinks of how he should have gone to their side. He looks at the old dude in the hot spring with him, and asks how long he's going to stay in the town. Rimuru asks if he isn't convinced that they're harmless. Fuze replies that his suspicion is long gone and says that the place is just comfortable because he hasn't had a real break in so long. Rimuru mimics the cool words he said when he first came to the town, but realizes that Fuze's not even listening. He asks about Yume and his guys while reminding him of the promise he made to make them champions in his place. Fuz replies that it won't be a problem, because he has laid the groundwork. Fuz stands to leave the hot spring after a while, and Rimuru suggests some things to him which he listens to. Rimuru gives his condition for building a road to the Bloomin' Kingdom, which Fuz says is a simple matter. Rimuru hears the voices of the girls on the other side of the hot spring, and wishes that he had gone there instead. Phobio and the 2 clowns reach the entrance of a cave where Charybdis is. They talk about the thirst for destruction that it's emitting, even when it hasn't been revived yet. Footman tells Phobio about the things required to revive Charybdis under normal circumstances and why it's like that. He tells Phobio about his role, which is to take Charybdis into his body. This surprises Phobio, and Tyr tells him that he can still quit before they continue. She tells him about the possibility of Charybdis reviving on its own, and tries to coerce him by saying the bad things that'll happen if it does revive itself. Phobio says that he's going to make the power of Charybdis his, which makes the clown pair commend his perception. Phobio enters the cave with a torch. He continues to tell himself that he'll have Charybdis's power and teach Milim a lesson. Outside the cave, Footman and Tyr discuss their plans as they laugh at Carrion's underling for being stupid. Tyr tells him that one of the dragon corpses she prepared is missing, which Footman replies to as they continue to laugh. At Rimuru's city, Kaval and Guido push Milim's cart of hunting hall, while Eren hypes her up. Rimuru thanks them for their hard work, but he soon gets passed around as they all get alerted. Benimaru and some other officials immediately arrive at the scene as a dryad, emitting a murderous aura. Rimuru wonders if it's Trainee, while she introduces herself as Dryad Traya, Trainee's younger sister. She tells them that there's an emergency and begins to explain the calamity that's coming. She tells them about Charybdis and how her sisters are trying to slow down its revival. Traya tells them to prepare an airborne combat force because waging war on land is futile against Charybdis, who's the ruler of the skies. In a meeting room, Traya tells Rimuru and his officials about Charybdis. She calls Charybdis a child of Veldora. and explains how it was generated from a cloud of Veldora's magicules. Rimuru, who's dripping cold sweats, begins to think about how he and Charybdis are like brothers, and he wonders if it's coming because he realizes that Veldora's in his stomach. Fuse talks about how Charybdis is more dangerous compared to the Demon Lords, which Vesta calls a monster with no intelligence as he further explains it. Tria informs them about Charybdis' summons that has occupied some lesser dragon corpses that were close by for unknown reasons. Shuna stands to ask Rimuru what they're doing to do. Milim laughs and says that they're forgetting her. She claims that Charybdis is no match for her, which makes Rimuru excited. His excitement is killed when Shion rejects her offer to help while giving her reasons, which Shuna also complies with. Shuna asks the downcast Milim to help her master whenever he's in desperate need of help. Rimuru tells Milim to believe in him while she sobs because she thinks it is her time to shine. Rimuru orders his people to make preparations to defeat Charybdis. They all reply to him positively and leave the room to go prepare. Fuse questions Rimuru about his plan to defeat a monster that even the Dryads couldn't stop. Rimuru talks about King Gazelle's backup and says that they'll do all they can. Fuse asks if he's not going to run away, which Rimuru replies. Fuse says that he understands now that they're monsters, which Rimuru replies that they aren't humans who are done for if they lose their king. Fuse tells Rimuru that it's hard to see him as a monster because he thinks like a human. Rimuru tells him about how he used to be a human, and he talks about how he and Shizu are otherworlders. He tells Fuse that he died and got reincarnated as a slime while he transformed into his human form. Eren sees Rimuru and calls him Shizu, while Rimuru continues to say how Shizu entrusted everything to him as someone from the same homeland. He talks about inheriting her will and how he can't go around making mistakes in her form. His words make Eren and the others affirm that he's someone they can trust. Rimuru looks at the mask he got from Shizu and tells them about the promise he made to her. He says that his prey is the Demon Lord Leon, which surprises Fuse and the others. They comment about how Charybdis will be easier to handle compared to Demon Lord Leon. Rimuru tells them that Demon Lord Leon comes later and they have to take on Charybdis first. The narrator begins to talk about the battle that is about to begin, which will take place between the capital city of the Jura Tempest Federation and the armed nation of Dwargon. The narrator says that their opponent is the Calamity-class Charybdis. The narrator talks about the awakening of Charybdis and how it's heading straight toward the capital city of Rimuru. Rimuru thinks of himself as the possible reason the monster is coming. Rimuru lists the forces that have been set up to take on the enemy and the reinforcement that King Gazelle sent. King Gazelle at his round table tells his officials that it's natural to help his junior in his time of need, while Rimuru wonders why King Gazelle thinks that he is his senior. Rimuru, who's in Shuna's arms, asks his forces if they're ready, which they reply positively. Benimaru attacks one of the Charybdis flying sharks with his Hell Flare skill. The shark gets engulfed by the black flames, and it falls to the ground with fire injuries on its body. Rimuru compliments Benimaru, but Shuna talks about how her brother's attack couldn't destroy it. Rimuru asks if it's one of Charybdis' skills which makes the Great Sage notify him of the magic jamming. Rimuru thinks about the things Great Sage told him, and he orders his forces to stick to the plan. Geld and the High Orcs take down another giant shark with the help of Gabiru, who finishes it off while Geld holds it down. Gabiru orders his boys to take care of the injured. He acknowledges Geld for making it easy for him to take down the shark. They notice another flying shark and Gabiru flies towards it to take it down. The Pegasus Knights attack another shark while the Goblin Riders serve as bait to bring another Megalodon to the ground. They attack it from every side as it reaches the ground, which Hakurou commends them for understanding their roles in the battle. Rimuru says that Hakurou is a pro at giving orders, and Benimaru replies that he has been able to refine his tough teaching style since he gained his youth back. Milim pops out of Rimuru's back and tells him that she wants to play too. Rimuru asks what she's doing there, and he reminds her of the instruction he gave to her. She replies that she can at least watch because it's boring in the village. Milim sees Charybdis approaching, and she tries to have Rimuru let her fight, but he rejects all her pleas. Sokka flies over one of the giant sharks called Megalodons, and her shadow gets cast on it. She informs Sue about it, and he immediately appears on her shadow. He uses his string ability to manipulate the Megalodon into fighting another one. Milim celebrates what he's doing while Rimuru compliments Sue. Sue tells Sokka to wait for the right moment to kill the Megalodon. Rimuru notices that Ranga is flying with Shion on his back, to which Benimaru replies that it happens probably when Shion rides him. They both take down different Megalodons while Milim continues to beg Rimuru to let her fight too. Everyone continued to fight until all the Megalodons were defeated. Shion and Ranga look at Charybdis. Shion says that it's the only one remaining, and Ranga says that they should test how strong it is, which makes Shion compliments him. Hakurou cuts the Megalodon that Gobta and the Goblin Riders couldn't defeat into pieces. He tells them that he's disappointed and that he'll raise their training difficulty, which makes Gobta scream out loud that it'll kill him. Sui cuts the megalodon he's manipulating into pieces and lands on the back of Charybdis. Rimuru says that it remains only Charybdis, while Benimaru says that Sui will be alright with his skill. They also notice Shion riding Ranga to go join up with Sui on Charybdis's back. The Pegasus riding knights also approach it, while Rimuru comments about Charybdis's size. Great Sage tries to give him information about its size, but Rimuru stops Great Sage and asks for the easiest way to defeat it, which makes Great Sage go silent. Rimuru watches how his forces are attacking it, but notices that it's not leaving a mark, which Benimaru affirms. Rimuru uses thought transmission to instruct the guys on Charybdis's back not to let down their guard, which the three of them reply positively to. Charybdis screams and prepares to attack. Knight Captain Dorf notices it and immediately orders the knights to evade and get away. The scales on the body of Charybdis peel off, and it knocks the people on its back off. Ranga catches Shion and flies to the ground while Sui lands safely. The scales hover around like weapons, and they attack the three of them. Sui struggles to dodge them all while Shion tries to block them with her large sword. Shion gets knocked down by the scales while Ranga uses his black lightning to stop the attack. The scales continue to hover around them, which makes Ranga tell Sui to escape with his shadow movement. He says that he'll shield Shion, who gives her own opinion. They talk about Rimuru's course of action, which is based on the highest chance of survival. The three of them decide to attack together and survive, while Charybdis attacks them with his scales. Rimuru arrives at the scene and calls them idiots, while telling them to rely on him at times like that. Rimuru instantly devours all the scales with his gluttony skill, which surprises Sui. Rimuru tells them to fall back and to leave the rest to him, which they're reluctant about. Rimuru shows them the reason why he told them to retreat and tells them to attack Benimaru's order. They all wish Rimuru good luck as he flies toward Charybdis while dodging its scales. Rimuru begins to attack it with powerful attacks that do damage while dodging the lasers it's shooting from its eye. Rimuru wonders if it's hurt, and he asks Great Seiji about it. Great Seiji explains that Charybdis has ultra speed regeneration and estimates the regeneration time to 3 minutes. Rimuru begins to think about what they'll do with the 3 minutes while still attacking it. Benimaru instructs the others to attack Charybdis with any attack they have and tells them not to give it a chance to recover. Rimuru narrates how the support of the Pegasus riding knights increased their strength more than tenfold, and how they thought they'd be able to take it down with an all-out attack. Later in the evening, Rimuru looks at Charybdis and thinks about how it's damaged by almost 30%. He looks at his people who are treating the injured ones with potions and says that it's looking back. Rimuru hears the struggling voice coming from Charybdis calling Milim's name, which surprises him. He immediately tells Great Sage to appraise Charybdis. Great Sage answers him and tells him about the angry emotion coming from the body that Charybdis has occupied. Rimuru thinks about the Great Sage and concludes that Charybdis was coming for Milim and not for Veldora, who's inside him. Rimuru sees it as an opportunity to have Milim fight. He sends a thought message to her, but realizes that she's asleep. Milim wakes up and tries to defend herself that she wasn't sleeping. Rimuru tells her that Charybdis seems to have business with her, which makes her excited. She looks at Charybdis and immediately sees that it's using Phobio as its physical body. Rimuru thinks about what she said and allows her to fight after they talk for a while. He tells her to let Phobio live because he's a servant of Demon Lord Carrion. Milim says that it isn't a problem and says that she'll show him the restraint that she has learned, which leaves Rimuru disturbed. Knight Captain Dorf orders the knights to get away from there immediately as Milim confronts Charybdis. Phobio calls her name from Charybdis and begins to attack her with its scales. Milim stops the attack and shoots her Drago Buster skill at Charybdis. The attack blows Charybdis apart, and Phobio falls out of the whole explosion. Rimuru flies over to catch him, and he smiles at Milim, who has a wide smile on her face. Rimuru performs some magic-based surgery on Phobio in the presence of his officials. Great Sage notifies Rimuru that the Magicore of Charybdis has been removed from Phobio and consumed. Great Sage tells him about the isolation process and the commencement of its appraisal. Rimuru sits on the ground and turns to Benimaru. Benimaru nods and immediately throws a healing potion on Phobio. Dorf comes to meet Rimuru, and Rimuru appreciates him for helping. They converse for a while, and Rimuru introduces Milim to him as a demon lord. Dorf looks at Milim and says that Rimuru is fond of joking. He tells Rimuru that he should have told them he had such a weapon from the start, which pisses Milim off. Dorf continues to talk about how the defeat of Charybdis is most fortuitous, while ignoring Milim, who's trying to say that she's a demon lord. Dorf says he has to leave to go report to his king. Rimuru thanks Dwarf for this help and sends his regards to King Gazel. The Pegasus Knights leave the scene while Rimuru asks Phobio if he's awake. Phobio sits up and asks where he is while struggling with a headache. Rimuru asks if he remembered what he did while Rimuru's officials prepared themselves for any threat. Phobio remembers and bows down to apologize for everything he did. Rimuru tries to question him, but Trainee, who's entering the scene, asks him how he found the cave where Charybdis was sealed. He tells them about the masked harlequins named Tyr and Footman. Trainee draws a mask on the ground and asks if it's the one. Phobio replies that it isn't, as he describes the type of masks Tyr and Footman both had on. Benimaru reacts to the description of Footman's mask, while Gabiru tells them about Laplace. Rimuru says that the dots have connected, as he talks about the Jack-of-all-trades group, while Trainee comments about Laplace. Benimaru tells his sister that they'll need to remember the name Footman, which she acknowledges. Milim tells Rimuru that it may not be Gelmud, but Clayman, who was planning everything in secret. Rimuru wonders who Clayman is, and she tells him that he's the one that loves schemes like that. Rimuru thinks about the demon lord named Clayman. Phobio tries to take responsibility and tells them that it has nothing to do with Lord Carrion. He bows as he tells them to take his life and leave Lord Carrion out of it. Rimuru tells him to be on his toes and not get fooled again next time, as he tells him to go. Phobio tries to tell them that what he did was unforgivable, but Rimuru replies that he doesn't want his life. He asks Milim to affirm it, which she did while saying her previous intention to hit him, but claims that she has matured. Milim asks if it's okay with Carrion, who enters the scene with Phobio's previous companion. He acknowledges Milim for realizing, and he thanks Rimuru for sparing his underling's life. He asks Rimuru if he's the masked magen that defeated Gelmud. Rimuru affirms, and he transforms to his human form. He asks Carrion if he came for revenge, which he says no to. Carrion orders Phobio to get up, and he smashes his face into the ground. He apologizes to Rimuru and his people for being negligent with his underlings. Carrion asks them to forgive Phobio, and tells Rimuru that he owes him one. Rimuru tells him to swear a non-aggression pact with his nation, which Carrion immediately does in his name and real title. He picks Phobio up and says that he'll see Rimuru again, as he disappears with his company. Rimuru turns to people to say that it's over, and that they're heading home. The scene starts from where Geld and Rigord throw a megalodon at Hakuryu, who neatly cuts out the flesh from the bones. The people applaud him as Gobta rains praises on his master, which Hakuryu laughs about. Kaijin and the craftsmen check out the scales of Charybdis as they think of things that can be used to make in their different crafting fields. The cocks prepare the flesh of the megalodons while the people feast and enjoy themselves. Gabiru and Geld drink together as they both rain praises on each other and laugh together. The narrator explains how peace has returned to the city of Rimuru because of the absence of threats like Charybdis. He talks about the non-aggression pact that Demon Lord Carrion agreed to, and how it adds further stability to the foundation of the Jura Tempest Federation. Rimuru enjoys a dip in the female side of the hot spring. He thinks of how worn out he is and thanks Milim for her help, to which she replies happily. She tells him that he fought well in the battle too, and that there'll be no objection if he planned to become a Demon Lord. Rimuru asks her about the merits of being a Demon Lord, and he asks her why she became one. Milim thinks about it for a while and asks Rimuru if she became one out of frustration because something bad happened. Rimuru asks why she's asking him, and she replies that she forgot her reason because it was a long time ago. She says that she found a reason as she lifted Rimuru. She says that she found herself a bestie because she became a Demon Lord, which Rimuru affirms, while the other girls in the hot spring smile. Milim tells Rimuru that she has to return to work, which Rimuru asks about. She tells him that it doesn't mean they'll never see each other again, but they'll be apart for a while. She drops Rimuru back into the hot spring and goes out of it. She transforms into her official dress and tells Rimuru that she'll tell the other Demon Lords not to mess with them. Rimuru asks if she is going to see the other Demon Lords, and Milim replies that it's her job. Rimuru and the other 4 girls in the pool consecutively tell her to be careful and she shouldn't let them trick her. Milim replies that she's too smart to be tricked as she flies away from the scene. Rimuru tries to tell her to wait, but she doesn't, while the other girls talk about how Milim is. At nighttime, the people quietly sleep on the ground in the party area because they are all either drunk or exhausted from the partying. Rimuru, who's sitting in a dark room alone, remembers when Shizu told him to save some children. He suddenly hears someone tell him to hurry to the capital, and he opens his eyes to realize that tears are dropping from them. The next morning, Rimuru sits on Renga's back and thinks about what he saw. He says that it's not a dream and calls it Shizu's regrets. Rimuru remembers some of the things she said when she was dying. She said she used to be an instructor at the Kingdom of Ingracia for kids from other worlds. Rimuru takes out the mask she gave him and thinks about the Kingdom of Ingracia, Rimuru thinks about all the capable leaders in the town and says that they'll be fine without him for a while. He assembles all his officials to the meeting room and tells them that he's planning to go to the kingdom of Ingracia and tells them the reasons why he's doing so. Rigard tries to talk, but Hakuryu takes the initiative to ask about his safety while saying the extent of his importance to the forest. Ranga replies that he'll be accompanying him and that they can all rest at ease. Rimuru affirms Ranga's words and tells the others to work together to keep their town safe. After Gabiru's dramatic scene, they all send Rimuru off and greet him farewell as he leaves the town with Ranga. Rimuru narrates how he's excited to be visiting a nation of humans for the first time after he reincarnated over 2 years ago. Rimuru talks about the location of the Kingdom of Ingracia and how it's home to the Free Union headquarters, which is an organization set up to help adventurers that Fuse and the others belong to. He gives the reason why the Free Union is located in that kingdom. He talks about how the children are there at the Freedom Academy, which was established by one of Shizu's students, Yuki Kagurazaka. He talks about the Japanese origin of the name and his plans to meet the person. Rimuru thinks about the letter of introduction that Fuse wrote for him and says that meeting the person won't be a problem. They arrive at the Kingdom of Ingracia, which Rimuru says that it's thanks to Ranga that he made it there in 3 days. Rimuru tells Ranga to stay in his shadow while giving his reasons. Ranga answers and tells him to call upon him at any time as he enters Rimuru's shadow. Rimuru talks about the strict identification policy for entering the capital and says that it's why he wore the magic-suppressing mask to conceal his aura. He says that he was able to enter the city with the ID that Fuse prepared for him. Rimuru walks around the big city while viewing things that he'd been seeing for the first time since he reincarnated. He reaches the Free Union headquarters and thinks about how rich they are because the building has a lot of glass. The automatic door also surprises him as he enters the building. A lady verifies his letter of introduction and says that the Grandmaster has agreed to see him. She leads Rimuru to a teleporting device which takes them to the entrance of the waiting room. She tells him to wait there for a few moments while Rimuru looks around the room as he wonders what the Grandmaster is like. Someone knocks on the door and enters the room. The person enters and thanks him for waiting. He introduces himself as the Grandmaster, Yuki Kagurazaka, to Rimuru, but soon notices the mask Rimuru is wearing. Rimuru replies to his greeting and introduces himself to the Grandmaster. Yuki says that the mask belongs to his teacher, which Rimuru replies to. He also tells Yuki that he's a slime that can mimic the appearance of monsters he eats. Rimuru removes the mask and Yuki immediately attacks him. Rimuru blocks Yuki's kick with his leg and tells him to calm down. He uses the game line that he told Shizu to calm the boy down and tells him that he also beat the game while catching the mask that was in the air. They discuss it, and Rimuru tells him that it is why he's there. Yuki packs all the damaged furniture into a corner of the room and questions Rimuru about anime and manga that he couldn't finish. Rimuru boasts about finishing all the anime and manga that existed up until he got stabbed and reincarnated. Yuki begins to flatter Rimuru by calling him master and begging Rimuru to teach him. Yuki asks Rimuru about a lot of games, which Rimuru answers with confidence, while the replies affect Yuki, who wishes that he could have seen them with his own eyes. Rimuru tries to tell him about the Prime Minister, but he says that he doesn't need it. Yuki says that it's incredible, and tells Rimuru that he's so happy to hear everything, but tells Rimuru that he wishes he saw it with his own eyes. Rimuru thinks about what he said and asks for papers, which Yuki provides. Rimuru transforms into his slime form and swallows the papers. He does some processing in his stomach and takes out a manga from his mouth. Yuki exclaims as he takes it from Rimuru while asking for the magic he used. Rimuru says that it's a trade secret, and he thinks about how he used Great Sage's ability to do it. He tells Yuki to bring more papers, which he uses to make the other volumes. Yuki thanks Rimuru, and Rimuru says that it's proof that he's not a bad slime. Yuki tells Rimuru that the news about Shizu is unfortunate, and he says that he'll trust Rimuru. He places the manga in his hand back on the stack and says that he'll take his time reading them later. Yuki asks Rimuru about what brought him while suggesting that it's about going back, which they discuss. Rimuru tells him that he has given up on going back because his body has probably been cremated. Yuki gives his opinion about it, which he explains with stories from the legends. Rimuru tells him about why he doesn't want to go back anymore, and he tells Yuki about Shizu's lingering regret. Yuki tells Rimuru that he's willing to entrust the children of Freedom Academy to him after listening to Shizu's regret. That Rimuru tells him. Rimuru narrates how Yuki arranged for him to be a teacher at the school and how he'll be teaching Shizu's students. He also talks about all the benefits that come with the job. Yuki asks Rimuru if he knows Hinata Sakaguchi as they walk through a hallway. He tells Rimuru that she was once a student of Shizu, which makes Rimuru ask if she was the one that left. Yuki affirms and begins to talk about Yuki in her prime who had control over Ifrit, but he says that Hinata gained surpassing hers at the age of 15. Yuki tells Rimuru the reason why he's telling him things like that. Yuki's reason makes Rimuru remember what Veldora said about otherworlders and summons. Yuki continues to talk about summons who are given specific powers for different purposes, just like the hero who may become mankind's trump card. Yuki explains how the summoning process works and how there are times when a child is summoned. He talks about how the kids are incinerated by all the energy in their bodies that have nowhere to go. Rimuru asks about the 5 kids, and Yuki replies that they were all summoned. He further explains the failures of different countries to summon heroes, and how Shizu took them in while doing her best to save them. Rimuru asks him about the nations he said are involved, and Yuki tells him about how heroes improve the military strength, which is a common concept in the world. He uses Shizu's strength to further prove it to him, and Rimuru replies that Shizu hated the world. He asks Yuki what's going to happen to the kids, and he tells Rimuru that the longest any of them ever lasted was 5 years. He continues to say that no one has found a way to prevent their destruction. Rimuru asks if the nations won't complain if he did anything to the kids, as he tells Yuki that he'll take on Shizu's wish. Yuki bows and begs him to save the children if possible. Rimuru thinks to himself that he'll do whatever he can, which is what he has been doing, and what he'll continue to do. He stands in front of the classroom door and takes a deep breath before going in with his mask on. He enters and tries to greet the kids, but suddenly has to dodge a fire attack from one of the kids. Rimuru begins to wonder if the kids didn't have long left. The other kids gather around the kid to comment about his new move, while Rimuru thinks to himself that the classroom is pure chaos. One of the little girls says that Rimuru looks like Miss Shizu, while 2 others give their own opinions. Rimuru thinks about their names and ages. He suddenly feels something react in him and wonders if it's Veldora. He thinks about how he expected the kids to be meek because of how much time they had left and says that it's depressing. The scene continues in the classroom at Freedom Academy. Rimuru takes the roll call, but none of the students answer their names. He calls their attention and tells them to respond loudly and clearly when they hear their names. Rimuru says that he understands and tells them that he'll bring a friend to the class. He summons Ranga to the back of the class and starts the roll call again. The 5 of them answer their names out of fear. Kenya tells Rimuru that threatening them with a giant dog is dirty. Ranga licks Kenya and introduces himself to him. Rimuru introduces himself to them and tells them to keep in mind that he's not as nice as Shizu. He forces a reply out of them with Ranga, and he thinks about how it won't be easy to gain their trust while he thinks about the reason. Rimuru asks them if they're ready for a test, which they all complain about. Rimuru tells them to relax, and he says that the test is the one they need. Kenya talks about how it's useless because they'll soon die, which the others affirm to try to evade the test. They tell Rimuru about how their previous teachers left them to play around. Rimuru tells them that the test is a fun game, where they get a chance to vent their frustration. Outside the classroom, Rimuru tells the kids about the one-on-one mock battle with him and the other necessary information about the mock battle. Alice talks about using the dog on them, which Rimuru promises that he won't. He immediately orders Ranga not to interfere in the mock battles. Kenya steps up to start the mock battle and claims that he won't lose to anyone except Shizu-sensei. Rimuru takes them all on and he analyzes their abilities. He tells them what to do to improve their abilities until the time is up for each battle. The kids that lose cry or angrily leave the stage to cheer on the next challenger. After defeating them all, Rimuru tells them that they must refer to him as sensei, while they all look sad because of their defeat. Rimuru wonders if the exercise reduced the energy in their bodies and thinks about using the degenerate ability to separate it from them. Great Sage tells him that the energy has fused with their souls and cannot be separated from them. Rimuru thinks about it and decides to find another way even though they don't have enough time. Rimuru claps his hands to gain their attention. He tells them that he's strong and that he'll save them. He takes out Shizu's mask to swear on it. The children immediately recognize the mask and they decide to trust him after he tells them that she entrusted the mask to him. Rimuru looks at them and compares their ages to Shizu's when she was also summoned. He thinks about how Ifrit possessed her, and he gets an idea of what to do. He looks at the children to reassure them that he's going to save them. He tells them that he won't abandon them because Shizu entrusted them to him. They all thank him while referring to him as sensei, while Rimuru thinks about how good it feels to be called sensei. He declares that they're all his students, but they just stare at him with Ranga being the only excited being at the scene. At nighttime, Rimuru narrates how he used the warp portal which Vesta taught him to visit Trainee. He thinks the idea he got is to make superior spirits inhabit the kids like Shizu and Ifrit. Rimuru arrives in the Great Forest and is welcomed by Trainee, who asks for what brings him there. Rimuru replies that he wants to ask for the location where superior spirits can be found. Trainee tells him about the place called the Dwelling of Spirits, which is ruled by the Queen of Spirits. Rimuru gets excited and asks if they can find superior spirits there, which Trainee affirms. She tells him that there are several entrances to the place, but the one she knows of has long vanished. Trainee continues to say that the Queen of Spirits they served has passed away long ago, and that she doesn't have any connection to the new one. She says that she doesn't know where the new one resides, and she apologizes that she couldn't be of help, which Rimuru replies that it's okay. Rimuru, who's sitting in a bed in his slime form, opens his eyes to see Shizu in the room. He tells her not to worry and leave everything to him. He looks at the mask on a table and looks back to see that Shizu's no longer there. Rimuru narrates how long he has been a teacher and what he has been using that time to do, which is to find superior spirits, but he says that hasn't found them yet. Rimuru talks about how they are having a picnic because everyone needs a break sometimes. Rimuru stands and tells the children that they'll be having combat training before lunch. The children complain about it, but he tells them that there's a reward. He pulls out a manga which they all see and get motivated because they want it. After the combat training, they express their complaints because of their loss, while Alice tells Rimuru that he's supposed to take it easy on girls. Rimuru laughs at all their comments and he playfully tells them that they're dreaming if they think they can ever surpass him. The children boo him while he continues to laugh. Rimuru tries to give them the manga for trying hard, but he gets interrupted by an approaching pressure. Rimuru asks what it is, and Great Sage informs him about the sky dragon that's approaching them. The dragon passes where they are as the wind pressure of his passing pushes down the children. Rimuru wonders if it's a stray dragon as it continues to fly toward the city. Rimuru tells the children that he's going to help because a lot of people will be hurt if they let the dragon run freely. Rimuru instructs Ranga to stay there with the kids and protect them. Ranga asks if he can go attack the dragon himself, but Rimuru replies that he'll go because he wants to put on a good show for the kids. Ranga replies that he understands while the kids try to talk Rimuru out of going to fight the dragon. Rimuru replies to them and runs towards the city. He throws his mask at them and tells them to hold on to it. Chloe catches it while the others surround her because of it. Rimuru brings out his wings and flies towards the city, while the children are amazed because he's flying. Rimuru thinks about how the people will recognize him, and he immediately changes his appearance. The people run into the city and they barricade while the guards prepare their arrows to shoot at the sky dragon. The city's official orders them to shoot, but the arrow bounces off the dragon's body. The dragon retaliates with a lightning attack, which causes some destruction at the wall of the city. Rimuru comes over to and devours the next attack of the sky dragon, which he says it's nothing compared to Charybdis. The sky dragon continues to unleash its lightning attacks while Rimuru consumes both the attack and the sky dragon with gluttony. Rimuru flies away from the scene while the officials and guards at the wall watch in disbelief. In the evening, Yuki tells Rimuru about a dinner invitation from a merchant named Mjolnir, who's keen to invite Rimuru to the store he runs. Yuki continues to say that the children can also come too. Rimuru asks why the man is inviting him, and Yuki tells him about what he was told. Yuki asks him if he defeated the sky dragon, which Rimuru answers. Rimuru asks about the merchant, and Yuki tells him everything he researched about Mjolnir while claiming that he can be trusted. At night, the children eat at Mjolnir's dinner party while Rimuru discusses with him. He does his best to entertain Rimuru while telling him that he knows that he's the one who saved him, even though he uses a different appearance. Rimuru asks Mjolnir about his information network and invites him to Rimuru City for business. After discussing for a while, Mjolnir accepts Rimuru's offer and they shake hands to seal the agreement. After the dinner party, Mjolnir tells Rimuru to visit again in the future for good deals, while a lady who works at Mjolnir's place prays for the kids that the blessings of the Queen of Spirits will safeguard them. Chloe asks if it's a spell, but the lady replies that it's a prayer they say in her hometown and explains the prayer to them. Rimuru, who hears her talk about the dwelling of spirits, quickly comes to her and asks her about its location. She tells him that she knows the place because it's close to her hometown. Rimuru gives her a handsome tip in exchange for her telling him where to go. Rimuru talks about the location on the map, which is close to the Republic of Ulgraja. Rimuru, Ranga, and the kids journey through the woods to find the dwelling of spirits. Rimuru swears to Shizu in his mind that he's going to save the kids. The narrator talks about Shizu's lingering wish A regret which she entrusted to Rimuru turned out to be children who'd been summoned there in an incomplete form. The narrator explains how the immature bodies were unable to control the immense magicule energy within them. He says that the energy would go berserk before long, which would destroy their bodies and doom them for them. The narrator explains how Shizu was able to survive with the help of Ifrit. He narrates how Rimuru decided to get superior spirits to inhabit the children's bodies, while Rimuru led them through the woods. Rimuru and the children stand in front of a giant gate, which is the entrance to the labyrinth. Rimuru tells the kids that spirits are dwelling inside, and he asks if they're ready. Rimuru continues to say that they may never come out once they go in. The children all act tough, claiming that it's all right. Rimuru smiles at Chloe, who's holding on to his clothes. Rimuru tells Ranga to take care of them if anything happens, which Ranga replies to, and proclaims that he'll protect them with his life. Rimuru turns to the door and places his hand on it. The giant door opens, and they all walk in. The kids begin to say their opinions about the labyrinth as they continue to walk behind Rimuru. Rimuru tells them not to wander away from the group, which they all comply with. Rimuru begins to think about the straight path, and the traps meant to confuse the sense of direction all over the place. Rimuru thinks about how they would have ended up if he didn't have his mental map. They begin to hear voices and people laughing, which makes Rimuru signal to the kids to stop moving. The kids begin to fret while Rimuru wonders how the voices are being communicated. One of the voices says that they aren't amusing, and she orders them to feel more fear. After a little while, Rimuru asks the voices if they're the spirits that live there. He tells them that he needs to talk to some superior spirits. He asks if they can take him to their superiors without impeding them. The voice replies that it's an amazing thing to say, and it accepts to tell him. Rimuru says that it was easier than expected, but he says that he has to do something before that. Chloe alerts Rimuru about what's ahead as a bright light shines toward them. After the blinding lights go down, they see that the straight path is glowing, which Rimuru considers as an invitation. They continue to walk forward on the glowing path until they reach the end of the road. Rimuru says that it's a dead end, which the voice replies, telling him not to rush. The voice says the small world and the surroundings of the dead end turn into a gladiator's room. The voice asks if it's amazing, while some of the kids exclaim at the sight of the transformation. The voice says that it's time for their test, and Rimuru sees a robot-like enemy in front of him. The eye of the robot begins to glow red, which makes Rimuru wonder why the shady character's eyes are always glowing red in games and anime. Rimuru asks if their test is to defeat the robot, which the voice affirms. Ranga says that he's going to take it on, but Rimuru tells him to protect the kids while he takes care of the robot. Ranga transforms to his Tempest Star Wolfses, and the kids immediately hide behind his leagues. Rimuru walks forward and asks Great Sage to appraise the robot. Great replies that it's a golem whose body is made from magisteel, while Rimuru confirms that it's intense because of its magicule energy. The golem attacks Rimuru, who's still thinking of what to do. He dodges the punch and asks the voice if she wants to kill him. The voice warns him that he's dead if he gets careless, and she asks if he can win. Rimuru thinks about how he feels like she's making fun of him while he dodges the attacks of the golem. Rimuru tells the worried kids that there's nothing to worry about. Rimuru tells the golem to apologize and gives the repercussions for not complying. The golem attacks him, and he dodges while using his threads to tie it down. The voice gets disturbed as the golem struggles to get free from Rimuru's arcane thread fetters. Rimuru destroys the golem with Hellflare, which the children comment about as they watch the scene. The kids run to go meet Rimuru as they continue to comment about how strong he is. Rimuru threatens the owner of the voice to come out, which she immediately does. The kids call her a fairy while Rimuru asks who she is. The fairy girl tries to introduce herself, but she bites her tongue, and after a little while she tells them that she's one of the 10 demon lords known as Ramirez of the Labyrinth. Rimuru hits her and tells her not to lie. He tells her about Milim, and she replies that Milim is the demon lord of absurdity. They discuss it for a while, and Ramirez asks if Rimuru's the slime of the great forest of Jura. Rimuru affirms it as he transforms into his slime form, which surprises the kids who begin to talk about him. Ramirez screams that they are ignoring her, and Rimuru transforms back to human form. He asks Ramirez how she knows about him, which she explains to him. Rimuru begins to wonder if she's a demon lord, because she met with Milim, while she continues to tell him that she's a demon lord. Ramirez eats a cookie and continues to talk about how good it is, while Rimuru wonders where all the food goes because of her small fairy size. The kids play around with Ranga and some glowing spheres, while Ramirez tells Rimuru her intention when she set them up against the golem. She complains about how he destroyed it, which Rimuru defends himself by saying that he thought it was a kill or get killed situation. Ramirez begins to explain how sophisticated the golem is and the spirits that she uses in each part of the golem. She tells Rimuru how she used the best spirit engineering to make it, which makes Rimuru remember Vesta's Magisoldier project that went up in smoke. She talks about how she got the shell that was thrown out, and how she restored it while claiming to be a genius. Rimuru thinks of how obnoxious she is, but he still thinks to himself that it's amazing because she completed the research that Vesta's team failed at. Rimuru tells her to do him a favor, but she tries to avoid it, which makes him threaten her with Hell Flare. He tells her that he'll get another Magisoldier for her, which immediately boosts her interest in what Rimuru has to say. Rimuru explained everything about the kids to her, keeping nothing hidden. He tells her how he intends to save them, which is why he wants to go to the dwelling of spirits. Ramirez comments about what the kids are going through while the kids sleep on Ranga's body. Rimuru asks her to introduce him to the Queen of Spirit, which she replies casually that she's the one while eating the cookie in her hands. Rimuru is left surprised and he tells her not to joke around. She tells him about how she fell from grace to become a demon lord to answer Rimuru's questions. She also talks about Leon, who she claimed used to be a hero but he fell from grace. She tells him more information about him, which makes Rimuru think that Demon Lord Leon is more trouble than he thought. Rimuru thinks about Ramirez, who claims that she's defeated Leon with one punch, and he thinks of how Leon will defeat her because he believes that he can defeat her too. Rimuru asks Ramirez if she's going to lead him to the dwelling of spirits. Ramirez replies that she's not just a demon lord, but she's also the guide of saints and her other titles. She tells Rimuru about her duty to bestow the spirit's divine protection upon heroes, as she did with Leon. She tells Rimuru not to worry because she's impartial, and that she's the one who maintains the balance in the world. Ramirez begins to glow as the spirit in the room gets attracted to her, and she tells Rimuru that she'll aid him in his summoning while hoping that he calls forth powerful spirits. Ramirez leads Rimuru and the kids further into the labyrinth as Rimuru tells her about Trainee. She tells Rimuru about how she still has her memories, even though she was reborn while they discuss the dryads. She asks Rimuru to tell them to visit sometime. They get to an area in the labyrinth where Ramirez declares that they're at the dwelling of spirit, which is the deepest part of the labyrinth. Rimuru looks at the area and thinks of how it looks like Veldora's cave, and how it's overflowing with natural energy. Rimuru asks her about the superior spirits, and Ramirez explains how the summoning works. She answers their questions, which Rimuru thinks about and says that it won't be easy. It thinks about the children's affinities, but stops worrying as he talks about the unique skill, Degenerate. Rimuru turns to the kids to know if they're ready, and they all reply to him. Rimuru calls all their names and prepares their mind for it, while Ramirez flies over to the top of the place. Rimuru thinks of Shizu wherever she is and says that he'll make sure her wish is realized. At the dwelling of spirits, Ramirez tells them how to call the spirit over and what would happen if a spirit takes a liking to them. Ryota asks if they'll come, and Kenya hits his head to assure him that they'll come. Kenya asks his sensei for reassurance, which Rimuru replies that they will. Rimuru says that if they don't come, he'll tame a demon, while Ramirez comments about the evil look on his face. Rimuru asks who's going up first. Rimuru stands on the stage with Gale, who tells him to take care of the others if anything happens to him, which makes Rimuru pat his shoulder with a smile on his face. Ramirez asks what type of spirit Gale will summon, as he moves forward and kneels to pray. They all watch as tiny golden light particles come down to where Gale is praying. Rimuru thinks about how they're inferior spirits, and he thinks about creating a new spirit from the tiny spirit fragments. He calls to the great sage, who immediately asks Rimuru if he wants to consume and unify the spirits with gluttony. Rimuru says yes, and tells Gale to keep praying as he walks towards him. He consumes all the tiny spirits with gluttony, which surprises Ramirez, who asks him why he ate them. Rimuru tells her to keep quiet and watch while stating that he has an idea. He tells the great sage to begin, and it uses the unique skill, Degenerate, to unify the spirits into a superior spirit. Great Sage gives Rimuru information about the attribute of the spirit as it creates an auxiliary artificial personality for it. Great Sage asks Rimuru if he wants to unify the completed artificial superior spirit of the earth with Gale, which Rimuru accepts. He places his hand on Gale's head and transfers it onto his body, which shocks Ramirez. Rimuru uses appraisal skills to check Gale out and realizes that his rampant energy is calming down. Rimuru thinks about the successful operation and tells Gale that he did great. Gale thanks Rimuru with tears in his eyes, while Rimuru replies that he should think nothing of it, because it's only natural that he'd protect his student. Ranga and the other children celebrate, but Rimuru tells them to save the parties for after they're all successful. Alice comes to the stage and she closes her eyes. Tiny spirits with purple color get attracted to her. Rimuru consumes them as he did for Gale, while Ramirez looks at them worried. Great Sage uses degenerate skill to unify them and does the same processes as she did for Gale's spirit. Rimuru places his hand on Alice's head to unify the artificial superior spirit of space with her. He carries her up in his hands and tells her that she did great. Rimuru says that she's okay, while Alice kisses him on the cheek, which he thanks her for. Kenya steps on the stage and declares that he's the next. Light particles start to appear before he even starts to pray. The light particles gather together and a light spirit appears. The light spirit greets them, but Ramirez confronts him to ask what he's doing in her house. Rimuru asks who he is, and the light spirit introduces itself while calling Ramirez evil in the process. Rimuru tells Kenya that he has summoned the spirit of light, which makes Kenya exclaim. The light spirit talks to Kenya and makes a nickname for him while telling him the reason he came for him. The light spirit talks for a while and tells Kenya that he might become a hero before entering his body. Rimuru says it's fine, claiming that it's all according to plan, and tells Kenya that it's good for him, which makes him excited. Ryota comes to the stage, and Rimuru does the artificial superior spirit process for the tiny spirit particles he attracts. Chloe comes to the stage for her summoning. Rimuru places his hand on her head before she starts to pray. Chloe tells her sensei that she loves him with a flustered face, and Rimuru replies that he likes her too, while he wishes to himself that she waited more years before saying it. Chloe's goes on to pray, and they immediately feel pressure, which Rimuru thinks about the feeling. A female human-sized being appears in front of them, which makes Rimuru wonder if it's a spirit. Great Sage tells him that it's a spiritual body that's equivalent to a superior spirit and about its energy level. The spirit flies towards Rimuru and kisses him while passing through him, which makes Rimuru reverberate with Veldora that's in him. The spirit turns back and flies toward Chloe, but Ramirez says that she won't allow her to have her way. Rimuru asks Ramirez what she's doing, and she screams at him to be quiet. She tells Rimuru that the thing is dangerous, but the female spirit enters Chloe's, while Ramirez is arguing with Rimuru. She tells Rimuru not to blame her for whatever happens. Rimuru uses appraisal to check Chloe's body, and he sees that the immense energy has completely disappeared. He says that she's stable and seems okay. He asks Ramirez what it was, and she replies that it's probably a spirit that was born in the future, which she explains further to Rimuru. Ramirez begins to rant about the possible origins of the spirit that entered Chloe, while Rimuru thinks to himself that he's lost. Rimuru says to himself that it's all good as long as Chloe is okay. He walks up to Chloe and tells her that she's okay, and that everything goes according to plan as he lifts her. Chloe asks if everything went according to plan, which Rimuru affirms while looking away. Ranga and the other children begin to celebrate, while Rimuru thanks Ramirez for making it possible for the kids to be saved. Everyone bows to thank Ramirez, which makes her fly around feeling embarrassed. Fairies descend from the top of the place to play with them, while Rimuru looks at the mask saying to Shizu that he did it and that everything is now okay. Rimuru says that it's a happy ending, but he continues to narrate how he made another golem for Ramirez, which he claims is a different story. At Freedom Academy, Yuki thanks Rimuru, and Rimuru tells him not to worry. He tells Yuki that the children are fine and that they'll be able to live normal lives. Rimuru asks about the nations that cast the children, and Yuki explains how they won't be a problem. Rimuru asks about the children's ID and how they'll be members of the Union. Yuki replies to his good ideas and tells Rimuru his plans for the children, which is for them to study at the Freedom Academy for the time being. He talks about how he'll give them a chance to choose their future, which makes Rimuru say that he's counting on him. Yuki asks Rimuru about how he resolved the whole thing, but Rimuru replies that it's a secret while also telling him that there are some things he doesn't need to know. He gives Yuki a pile of manga instead, and Yuki kneels while he thanks his master. The boys run around while Ranga chases them with the girls on his back, as they all have fun. Rimuru looks at the mask and begins to think of all the things that have happened from the time he got reincarnated at Veldora's cave to the present moment. He says that the case is now closed and that all their problems have been solved. He looks to the sky and tells Shizu that it's all for the best when he hears her voice thanking him in the wind. At Rimuru City, everyone continues their daily activities for the prosperity of the Jura Tempest Federation. Peace continues to reign, as every character continues their business without any hindrances. In the darkness, someone with demonic eyes watches Rimuru on a transmission globe while talking about his summoning and his family that has gotten ahead of him. He claims that he knows Rimuru will lead him to the truth of the world as he laughs aloud. At the entrance of the kingdom of Ingracia, the children cry as Rimuru and Ranga prepare to leave. Chloe tells their sensei not to go, but the others tell her not to try and keep him there while acting strong with tears in their eyes. Rimuru goes closer to them and hugs all of them. He looks at Yuki and tells him to take care of them, Chloe goes on to hug him as he walks away, while the others who are still crying call her a crybaby. Rimuru gives Chloe his mask to make her stop crying and gives them all cool coats to wear. Rimuru tells them to be studious even when he's gone, to which they all reply positively. They exchange their farewells, and Rimuru rides off with Ranga, while the children call his name as they wave at him. Ranga asks his master why he gave Chloe his treasured mask, which Rimuru replies that he doesn't know the reason too. Hey stops somewhere on the road as Rimuru tells him the probable reasons, and they laugh while someone who's hiding behind a tree listens to them. Rimuru tells Ranga that they should return as he transforms into his slime form. They continue their journey while the person hiding behind the tree watches them go. At nighttime, in the middle of a forest, a lady with blood all over her body draws a symbol on the ground with the blood of the dead guy beside her. She swears that she's going to make a demon pay. She completes the drawing and activates it to summon a demon. The summoned demon asks for who summoned him from such a lowly station. The lady replies that she doesn't care if he's a demon if he'll grant her wish. He offers the demon her soul and begs him to make someone pay. The demon laughs and accepts to grant her wish. The lady thanks him and collapses while she wants to talk about his payment. The demon licks his lips as he says that their contract is complete. He comments about how sublime her emotion tasted, and he says that he'll do a great service for her. He claims that her payment will last for 3 days as her body and the dead guy beside her wither away. He laughs and comments about how much time has passed since he came to the living world, and he declares that he'll enjoy himself to the fullest. The narrator talks about the nation of Filtwood, which shares borders with the great forest of Jura. He talks about how Shizu paid a visit there after receiving an urgent request, which was to defeat a demon that had been revived. Someone welcomes her into the city and shows her to the reception hall. They enter the reception hall, and the people there begin to talk about Shizu, who they refer to as the Conqueror of Flames. Shizu looks at the number of people that have gathered there and exclaims in her mind. One of the adventurers named Cougar greets Shizu and they exchange pleasantries. Cougar asks her why she's there, and she replies that she got a request from the nation which Cougar comments about and says that he's there for the pay. He continues to tell her that he regrets it because he hears that at least 10 skilled adventurers already died. He tells her that her arrival is going to give hope to everyone, to which Shizu replies that he's exaggerating. They hear sounds that catch their attention as the minister walks to the stage with some guards behind him. He tells the adventurers that he brings unfortunate news. The minister says that their champion, the 2 Silver Wings, has passed on. The adventurers begin to murmur as the news surprises them. The minister continues to say that their bodies were devoured with no traces left behind. He tells the adventurers that the request given to them is to defeat the resurrected demon. He shows them accounts from a century-old text, and tells them about how the demon was successfully sealed away by Knight Orthos. He says that the text didn't mention the way he sealed the demon, and claims that it's why they need all their strength. The adventurers begin to raise their complaints and questions about the situation. One of the adventurers says that he's leaving because famous adventurers like the 2 Silver Wings died. He tries to leave the reception hall, but the guards cross their spears to show that he can't leave. The minister tries to calm the adventurers and tells them that they know the goal of the demon, which he tells to them. The adventurers think about what the minister said, and Shizu raises her hand to ask a question. She says that the demon is probably an academic, and she asks if the demon has a name. The minister replies that there's no record indicating that the demon had a name. Shizu thinks about what he said and says to herself that the demon can't be an archdemon if it's not named, while still wondering how the 2 Silver Wings were lost. Shizu asks the minister if he intends to keep them there until the demon arrives, which he affirms. He says that it's the only strategy they can use because the 2 Silver Wings have fallen. Shizu thinks about his words and how it seems that the minister sees them as the enemy. The adventurer that tried to go out says that he has no obligation to serve their nation, but he gets slashed by a soldier as he turns to leave. The other adventurers begin to question them for it, and the soldier tells them to take a good look at the man before they start cursing at him. He kicks the dead adventurer, and a lesser demon comes out of his corpse, which surprises the others. The soldiers in the hall create barriers around the lesser demon as it burns into nothing. The soldier tells them about the possibility that some of them are possessed, and he asks them to do as they say. He tells them that they'll be cut down if they don't cooperate. The adventurers begin to panic as the Orthos begin to look for the possessed ones amongst them. One of the adventurers who's in has a cloak that covers his head down and laughs aloud while the others look at him. Shizu tells Cougar that he's very powerful and that he shows no weakness for someone in a mage's attire. Shizu begins to think about how she didn't sense his presence before and says that it's unbelievable. The man laughs and says that they hoped to build cooperation by making them believe that there was a demon there. The minister asks for what he's implying, and the man further explains their intentions. He tells the captain of the soldiers that he has no intentions to obey or to play along with their charade. The man says that the captain of the soldiers was the one who summoned the lesser demon. The captain asks if the man is trying to mock him. The man laughs and tells him that his efforts are pathetic. The captain asks if he's trying to go against the principles of their nation, while he and his soldiers raise their weapons against the man. The man says some words to the captain, which makes his intention known to Shizu, that he wants to kill them all to find the demon. Shizu stands in front of the captain to confront the man about it. Shizu tells the man her name and asks for his own. He replies that she can call him Kuro, and talks about how he got the name. The other adventurers move back in fear to give them space, as Shizu tells Kuro that she can't tolerate what he's doing. Kuro laughs and says that she'll be the first person he'll kill as he shoots a fireball spell at her. To his surprise, the fire surrounds Shizu, and she tells him that fire does not affect her. Kuro comments about her superior spirit and declares that he'll play for a while. Kuro takes out his metallic talons, while Shizu surrounds her sword with flames. They begin to fight, while the other adventurers comment about the fight as they watch it. Shizu asks Kuro who he is as they exchange blows, and he replies that it's none of her business after saying some things to her. Shizu says that she'll get serious because she can't have someone as dangerous as him moving around freely. She activates a massive fire attack and shoots it at Kuro. After the smoke clears out, they see Kuro without his cloak as he commends her for being able to use Ifrit's power to that level. They see his wings and some other features that make Shizu say that he's a demon. Cougar says that he made it out of the large attack without any injury, but Kuro replies that he's feeling some pain in his arm, and he says that it is the reason he'll be taking the fight seriously. Kuro immediately attacks Shizu at very high speed, but he loses his arm as he hits her mask. He retreats backward and comments about the mask. Kuro says that it's enough for one day, and he disappears from the scene. The other adventurers begin to hail Shizu, while the minister tells them that they don't have any intention to neglect the adventurers, but claims that they only want to know the identity of the demon. Shizu thinks about how glad she is that he withdrew, because he's powerful. She remembers some of the things he said while thinking about the request Kuro received and his employer. In Shizu's room, she sits by the window thinking about the things Demon Lord Leon told her once about demons who are known as progenitors. She thinks about the black progenitor he called Noir, and doubts that such a being would come to a place like that. After some time, someone knocks on her door, and she tells him to come in while putting on her mask. The knight comes in and informs her that His Majesty wishes to speak with her. He asks if she'll accompany him, which she accepts. He begins to praise her about her fight earlier while she tries to let him know that the demon is stronger than her. He says that they have nothing to fear because she's there, and he talks about how regretful it is because the demon escaped. They continue to walk, and Shizu soon realizes that they're going underground. She wonders if it's related to the demon's remains. She also thinks about the knight who's leading her there, because she didn't see him at the reception hall during the fight, but he knows about it. They enter the underground hall, and she sees 3 thrones while the stone door closes. The minister sits to her left, while the king sits on the right. She begins to wonder what's going on, but sees the knight walk up to the throne at the center and sit on it. The knight says that he's grateful to the king because she's willing to give her life for his nation. She asks for the meaning of what he said, and the minister reveals their real intention, which is to sacrifice her while she's still exhausted from her fight with the demon. She says that they were in collision from the start, which the knight affirms and says that his name is Orthos. Shizu immediately remembers the things she read from the ancient text and says that he wasn't sealed all along. Shizu says that he's a demon and an enemy of mankind. Orthos replies that he's also the ruler, while Shizu begins to talk about his plan to eliminate the best adventurers and pass them off as demons. She continues to talk about how he'd gain more power and how the nation of Filtwood would be ruled by demons and a puppet king. Orthos tells her about how he watches her fight through the minister's eyes while calling the demon a disappointment and how he's interested in her mask. He tells Shizu the evil things he's going to do to her. Shizu points her sword at him as he stands and begins to bring out his demonic features. She attacks him, but he easily grabs her sword and compares her to the 2 silver wings. Orthos begins to tell her about the ranks among demons, and he says that he's a legendary class, which is also an archdemon. He punches her away and begins to explain how being a man-made hero made him more powerful as he walks towards her. He talks about how the power gave him a name, allowing him to become a named being on his own, just like the supreme being who reigns at the top. Shizu thinks about the top, he said, but he grabs her neck and lifts her while talking down on her, who people call champion. He tells her to use Ifrit's power, which makes her powerful, and a little while laughing at her. Shizu thinks about it and tries to remove her mask, but she feels a reverberation as Kuro appears in the room. Orthos drops Shizu and turns to Kuro, who tells her that it's his policy to always keep his promises. He laughs and drops the heads of the guards he killed, as one transforms into the head of a lesser demon. The minister and puppet king say it's impossible because their soldiers are strong, but Kuro tells them that their standard for strength is far too low. The minister says that he's strong, but he's no match for them, only to get stabbed in the head with Kuro's talons. The puppet king falls and says that he thought they had the protection of a greater demon. Kuro walks over to him and kills him too, while Orthos smiles. Orthos talks down on Kuro and says that a lower demon can't defeat an archdemon. Kuro instantly grabs him by the neck and asks him who he's referring to as a lower demon. He says that he's confident for someone who's dependent on the red progenitor, and he declares that he'll destroy his very soul, so he doesn't get revived. The next day, the narrator talks about how all the demons dwelling in the nation of Filtwood were purged. The death of their minister and king was proclaimed the work of the demon named Kuro, and the records indicated that Shizu defeated Kuro. Shizu remembers what Kuro said to her before he disappeared and before leaving Filtwood with Cougar. Cougar asks her about Kuro, but she tells him that he's better off not knowing. They exchange farewells as they go their separate ways, while Shizu thinks to herself that someone will defeat Kuro one day. The narrator explains how Rimuru and Kuro will make contact, which is when Rimuru summons him and names him Diablo.